Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and a warm welcome to the inaugural Senior NCO Leadership Study Day, presented here by the Centre for Army Leadership, the CAL. Really good to see so many of you with us this morning. We anticipate we've got about 2,500 people tuned in today from all around the world, and welcome especially to our Australian counterparts, who I understand 12 hours ahead are currently in the bar enjoying this one, so welcome. I'd like to introduce the team. First of all, Professor Lloyd Clark, who will be joining us later on this morning to host the Q&A panel session. Behind the camera, but very much on point, SO2 Leadership, Major Ben Acton, W1 Leadership, W1 Chris Nichol, and the man behind, the brains behind the outfit today, the individual that's taken it from concept to reality, Colour Sergeant Rob Hamilton for the Rifles, on loan to us from the Infantry Battle School. So many thanks to the team for their support today. I'm really excited about this session today, and it's been a long time in the planning, really important to us. But why you specifically, our senior NCO cohort? I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but leadership is an all ranks business. It's not an officer's sport. Everyone's a leader from private through to CGS. As officers, we are fortunate in terms of the exposure and certainly the training and education we get with leadership and leader development. And it's our belief that there's more we owe to you, our senior NCOs, and indeed our junior NCOs and warrant officers as well. The organisation understands that, and we're getting after it. And today is a small contribution on that journey. But why specifically the OR6 and the OR7 cohort? To me and to us here at the CAL, you are absolutely critical in how we as an organisation do leadership, because you sit at the apex of two very important cohorts. On the one hand, our junior NCOs, it's you that sets the example to them, and it's those individuals that set the example to the majority of our fighting force, those that right at the forefront of our operational success. And I know the Army Sergeant Major this morning will talk a lot more about junior leadership and your role in nurturing that junior leadership. But the other role you have as platoon troops, sergeants, staff sergeants, is mentoring our young officers. Those young men and women who are fresh out of training here at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and their phase 2 training, that are young, keen, have been well trained, but lack that critical experience as young leaders that they need to really really give our army the success we need. And they are our future OCs, commanding officers, and indeed our senior leaders. And therefore, it's absolutely critical that they get the right start in their early army career. And that training, that mentorship, that coaching, and that nurturing comes from you, our sergeants and our staff sergeants. So you do play an absolutely critical role. And it's great that you're all here today. The title of today, Rank as an Opportunity to Do More for Your People. And I'd like to dwell on that. Why have we chosen that title? Firstly, because it's a key message from the Army Sergeant Major, and it's a theme he chose for the RSM's conference 3 weeks ago. And consistency in messaging is absolutely critical. But secondly, because I think it's an excellent way to reflect on what rank actually means, because rank is a privilege. It's a privilege earned, and you have all earned it, but it's a privilege nonetheless. And with that comes responsibility. Responsibility to get the best out of our people for the betterment of our organisation, so that we can ultimately deliver mission success, which is what we exist to do. But secondly, it's to do the best by our people and for our people. And everyone deserves that, every individual in the British Army. And that's our role as leaders. And the two go hand in hand. So I'd like you to think about that title today and what that means. Rank as an opportunity to do more for your people. And today is all about listening, learning, reflecting, internalizing, but ultimately it's about doing. And if there's one question I'd like you to take away at the end of today, is what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do differently tomorrow? Because to lead is a verb, it's a doing word. So when all talking is done, all the thinking and reflecting is done, you've got to make a difference. And if you're going to use your rank as an opportunity to do more for your people, you've got to take action. So what is action going to be for you? We've got an all-star cast lined up for you this morning. It's an absolute privilege to introduce in a minute our first speaker, Commander of the Field Army, Lieutenant General Ivan Jones, who needs no introduction to you all. It's an absolute pleasure to have him here as our keynote speaker today. General Jones will be speaking for approximately half an hour, 20 minutes talk, followed by 10 minutes of questions. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Equally, if you want to chat and discuss things amongst the wider audience, please use the appropriate chat box there. We will then receive the Q&As, the questions here at the Central Army Leadership, and I will field those to General Jones. Once he is complete, I will hand over to the Army Sergeant Major, who will be with us again for approximately half an hour. Just shy of 10 o'clock then, we'll take a break, refresh our brews or our beers if you're in Australia. And then at just after 10 o'clock, I will hand over to Colonel John Douglas, who's going to talk to us about toxic leadership, a consistent theme which we need to get after. And our last speaker today, who will also join us on the panel, is SNCO, all the way from Brisbane, currently in lockdown as part of COVID-19 as he transcends the crosses over state lines. And he will be joining us to talk about leadership from an Australian perspective. And it's fantastic to have an ally with us today to give their views on these important topics. After that, then, we've got about 35 minutes where we're allowing you to break out. For those of you who are tuning in as individuals, just a personal reflection time. If you're in mess groupings, and we're tracking about 192 mess groupings with us today, which is a fantastic turnout, it's a chance for you to do your own breakouts and reflections and discussions. And that will then feed into the Q&A session, the panel session, with the Army Sergeant Major, Colonel Douglas, and Sergeant Katz, hosted by Professor Lloyd Clark, as I've already said, before we then wrap up for a close at 12:30. So that's it from me. Again, a warm welcome to you all. I really hope you get the value out of today. This is really important, and we welcome your attendance. So without further ado then, it's my sincere pleasure to invite our keynote speaker today, the Commander of the Field Army, General Ivan Jones. General, a very good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to talk to you all this morning. I had no idea until I was sitting having breakfast how many I'd be speaking to, and then I was told it was several hundred, and I said, oh, that'd be great. I now find it's several thousand. I think the opportunity to use mediums like that to reach, or like this, to reach out to such a broad audience, not just in the UK, but around the world, I think is really powerful. And the comment that Colonel Sharp made at the beginning, that leadership is not a sport for everybody, I think is key. And using mediums like this as an opportunity to continue our professional development, I think is an important opportunity that we need to grasp. I was with the CO's designate course last night and quite inspired. You've got some really impressive COs, men and women, coming to command your regiments. And I was just reflecting on the back of that, about this idea of leadership and how command can be lonely and leadership can be lonely. And I think my reflection is that command is only as lonely as you make it. And certainly when I was a CO, I spent probably more time in the warrant officers and sergeants' mess than I did in any other part of the regiment. And just sitting to my right here is Paul Carney, Field Army Sergeant Major, who's just keeping an eye on me and make sure I don't stray off the straight and narrow. But he did likewise when I was a commanding officer as a sergeant in the regiment. I spent quite a lot of time with him and his cohort in the mess. Why? Because I think, again, as was mentioned earlier, you are an important body. Indeed, I would say within the regiment that I commanded, the most important body, the most important rank. It was you that all of the junior NCOs who really drive the activity within a regiment, and by extension, the soldiers look up to. And you set the example for them. But you haven't stepped far enough away that you don't understand what their emotions are, what their feelings are, how it feels to be in the regiment. And therefore, sitting down with with that group within the mess, putting across my views, my thoughts, my intent directly to them, without having to do it through the convoluted chain of command, which is wonderful on the battlefield, but if you want to get intent across in barracks, can act as rather an unhealthy filter, both downwards and upwards. But also as a commander and as a leader at any level, I just think that ability to get ground truth. What does it feel like? Because as I say, the chain of command is the best water filter you will find. What comes through at the very top is this beautiful, clear, purified, still water. And all of the sediment, all of the dirt, all of the muck, that's really important to understand, all of the grit, that is filtered out. And so I think it's important for leaders at all levels to have the opportunity to engage at every level, to understand what it feels like, the genuine impact of the decisions you make, because it's only by understanding that can you make better decisions. But I think there are moments as a leader which can feel quite lonely. And I think one of the loneliest moments I had was as a young troop commander in the Falkland Islands. And this is a dip that I used with the RSM's course about 3 years ago when I spoke to their conference, and I haven't used it for a while since, and thought it might be quite apposite for this chat this morning. And although what we did on a tour in the Falkland Islands was quite impressive, the discipline record of the subunit was particularly woeful. I was a young troop commander in a unit called, or in a subunit called 9 Parachute Squadron Royal Engineers, which, although not quite independent, felt it was independent. The OC was a gentleman called Peter Wall, who went on to become the Chief of the General Staff. And I would say that had he not been Peter Wall, and with all the potential that he had to rise to the very top of the army, I think he may well have been sacked at the end of that tour. But there was one evening, a Saturday evening, where the wheels fell off of my troop. I wasn't aware of any of it until the early hours of the morning, when I was called to get told that there had been an incident in the Upland Goose Hotel in Port Stanley. And not only was there an incident, but following the incident, the lads who had just come back from a survival course that we had run, had, using their survival skills, hot-wired a truck, driven out of Stanley, chased by the local police, which sounds like something out of a comedy sketch, drove into a ditch, and one of the lads ran off in the driving rain and wind, bitterly cold, through a minefield, no bang, so he seemed to have survived, and then disappeared over the hill. They then collected a group of locals and sent a search party out to try and find him in the pitch black, driving rain, no ambient light. Not a great situation to be in. Coincident was that I had a small section working up on Mount Kent on one of the radar stations, and they decided they would have a few too many beers and cause some damage to one of our strategic assets on the island. Again, slightly compounding what was going on in Stanley at the time. And really, just to add more to the evening, a young lad, Tots Totterdale, in the other ranks bar, decided that the summer hit, which had been played continuously on the jukebox, he had had enough of, and so lifted a bar stool and put it straight through the jukebox. I found myself woken to help go and hunt for the young lad that went missing, and he was found in a barn, although bitterly cold and suffering the early stages of hypothermia. I then had a very brisk trip back to Mount Pleasant from Stanley, where I was standing in front of the OC, Peter Wall, who gave me the most almighty telling off and talked to me about leadership and about my responsibility, to which the chippy young officer that I was then replied, "Hey, Peter, look, I can't be in 3 bloody places at once. I was here in Mount Pleasant." And he turned to me and said, "Ivan, if you need to be in 3 places at once, you will be in 3 places at once. Now get out." And I think I headed out, having just handed over a £50 fine to the Squadron Fund. And as I walked out, grumbling to myself about the inability to sort of separate out my body into 3-4 component parts, how many parts were needed to oversee the different parts of the Falkland Island where my troop were dispersed, I started to reflect on the deeper meaning of what Peter Wall was saying. And it was not about my physical presence as a leader. It was about the effect that you have as a leader when you're not there, the values, the standards, the ethos that you set. And those under you should reflect those values, those standards, that ethos, the culture that you create, whether you are there and whether you're not there. And that influence should be that powerful. And that has remained with me even to this point now as CFA, which is why I recount this story to you, because of all of the books that I have read, of all of the lists of leadership qualities that one tries to tick off in some sort of aid memoir-like way. I think that was probably the most profound lesson for me about leadership, that it's not just about your physical presence and the direct impact that you have upon you, but it's the impact you also have when you're not there. So for me as a CO, it was the impact that the guards on the front gate had when they met people who arrived. It was the impact that the cleaners had when they met people in the corridor, or the QM staff had when they spoke to people, or those in the field troops and the field squadrons or support squadron had when they did their business in support of the battle groups. That needed to reflect me, my personality, and my character. And so I think for me, that is important. But I also think in saying that, we should think about the evolution of leadership. And I think there is a danger that we tend to view, I think by dint of our tradition, our history, our heritage, we tend to view leadership through a very narrow lens. I think the lens is broadening, but I think you, the junior NCOs, the warrant officers, the officers, you all have a part to play in broadening that. I'm treading quite carefully into an area here because with such a wide audience, I know that some of you may on first pass not agree with what I'm about to say, but I say it to stimulate your thinking, not to give you an absolute answer. And I think leadership should involve thinking. It should involve you questioning your approach, your style, your attitude, and continuously look at ways like this day to day at how you can improve what you deliver, what you offer as a leader. And that narrow lens for me tends to be one, and it's still the methodology at Sandhurst, is that we look at leadership through the lens of the infantryman on the battlefield. And that moment in contact with the enemy when you subordinate yourself to the directed orders that are given to you, for clear reasons that lives depend upon it. I think I would offer two observations. The first is that for most people in their military careers, that event may never happen. And if it does, it may be infinitesimally small. And if it is so small and so slight, why do we tend to build our whole leadership culture on that authoritarian directed approach to leadership? Now, many will say to me, because lives depend on it and people must react to orders. I get that. And I'm sure I'm speaking to many of you that have wandered the fields of Helmand Province. But my experience under fire, and the experience of many under fire or under extreme pressure, is that when you are under pressure, when you are afraid, people naturally look to be led. There isn't a, I don't want to be led. There is a look to be led. They look to be inspired. And therefore, why do we feel the need to impose something that's so absolute at a time when we know people will subordinate themselves? And I think I would add another point to this in terms of the way our battlefield is evolving. And I think the evolution of it does require an evolution of our leadership. And that is from the defensive hollow squares that we formed in the 1800s, or the columns of march in the Napoleonic Wars, through to the trench warfare, when your comrade was standing next to you, even through to the Second World War, and indeed much of what we do today in Brecon. You can look left and right and see those members of your section, your platoon, your company in relatively close proximity. I would say that the battlefields of the today and ever increasingly in the future are going to be far more dispersed, particularly if we are operating, as we will be, in the urban clutter. And those neat choreographed Strictly Come Dancing events will not manifest themselves in this complex environment. And in this dispersed environment, Leadership will not necessarily be one of directed orders to people to your left and right, but one of seeking to draw information from them, to understand what they can see, what their views are, what their thoughts are. So leadership doesn't have to be absolutely directed, but one of really drawing on the strength of those around you. And so I think we have to, as we look at ourselves as an organization, not luxuriate in a sort of reflective view that we have the very best form of leadership in the world, but always look at how we can improve the way that we lead. And I think we must. And we've done that within the field army. And I go back to this idea that command or leadership is a lonely game. I don't lead the field army on my own. I lead the field army with a leadership team that consists of myself, the Chief of Staff of the Field Army, Director Land Warfare, and the GOCs from 1, 3, and 6 Division. That is the Field Army leadership team, working together to ensure that the decisions that we make are collective, that I draw on the very best of the experience that I've got around you. And as we seek then to make decisions on things that affect you, we look wider and broader at who we can bring in, what diverse range of ideas and thoughts, of experience that we can bring in to support us, so that we as a collective body can make the right decisions, take the right course of action to ensure that we as an army continue to grow, adapt and evolve, which is something we absolutely must do. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something to me. Okay. So I think in terms of leadership, I would encourage all of you not to look at it as some isolated thing that you do on your own, but something you do in cooperation with others. Not just those to your side, those below you, but also those above you. Draw on the advice of those above you, pull on the experience of those alongside you, and really nurture those below you. Pull on their experience. And I think you'll be surprised, the thoughts and ideas, the knowledge, the experience of those you have commanding below you as junior NCOs, because I do believe that when I look at our rank structure, those are the very best that we have in the world. And just extending that idea of those below you, I would offer one additional thought, perhaps slightly philosophical, but one that I'd like you to reflect on. And maybe as Commander Field Army, you might have expected me to talk about the way we fight, the way we close with the enemy. And I'm very happy to take questions on that. But I'm going to touch on something slightly different. I'm going to touch on an idea of social responsibility and what is our responsibility as an institution and the various components of that institution. The divisions, the brigades, the battalions and regiments, the companies and squadrons and batteries. What is the responsibility we have to society and the responsibility we have to those that we take from society? There is a danger, I think, that we can look at ourselves in splendid isolation. We have our own health support, we educate our soldiers, we give them housing, we have our own little ecosystem. We can live independent of wider society. But what is remarkable for all of the chatter about veterans, who are a small minority, those that struggle, the vast majority of people who leave the army and go back into wider society go back better people. But I think we need to reflect on what comes into the organisation and how we manage them. And I'm sure this may apply to some of you. Many of our soldiers come from difficult and challenging backgrounds where friends, family take drugs, where you have certain views on race or religion, and your learned behaviour ideas are born of those. And I don't think you can change 18 years of learned behaviour in perhaps 14 weeks of basic training. Nor do I think it's going to change in the weeks that follow on trade training. And nor do I think even those views are going to change in the first weeks or months within a battalion. It's going to take time, education, learning, and dare I say it, great leadership by junior NCOs and senior NCOs and warrant officers and officers within our regiments. Because I think we owe it to those that we bring in to nurture them, to invest in them, and to develop them. And dare I say it, and I know there but for the grace of God go I, perhaps on that day in the Falklands and other instances in between, and many of the RSMs that I chat to today, there but for the grace of God go many of us who were given a second chance or a third chance. But I often hear stories about a reluctance to take risk with our soldiers, a reluctance to give them a second chance, a reluctance to invest in them, whether that be through CDT failures or discipline failures. The reality of life is our soldiers, a few of them, will let us down. Is our response as an institution simply one of dismissing them and throwing them back out onto the streets, back to the society they came from, the challenges that they faced then and decided to leave? Or are we a better organisation than that? Do we believe that we have the softer leadership skills, the leadership skills not just born of the battlefield, but born of the barracks, that enable us to coach, to nurture, to develop, to help these young men and women become better people than they are? Because if we can invest in them and we can get them up to those ranks of junior NCOs and the ranks that you hold now, I can tell you what, we've got some of the most impressive people that I've come across in anything that I've done anywhere around the world. So I would say, as leaders, and not just for those moments when you're standing in front of people, because the impression you set when you are not there is equally important. Do invest in your people, do set the standard for them. And I absolutely believe that if you, as the sergeants and senior NCOs within this army, do that, we will be a fundamentally better organisation for that. Thank you very much indeed. That's all I've got to say. I think we've got some time for some questions, yeah?
General, we have. Thank you very much indeed for your insights there. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Firstly, and you touched on this subject, and the subject I know is close to your heart, and that's culture, and the culture of our organisation. You spoke about our heritage, our history, our traditions. You spoke about having an impact when you're not physically there. A lot of this transcends across to our culture as an organisation and the various subcultures that exist at the divisional, regimental, battalion level, again, as you spoke about. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on your views on that relationship between leadership and culture and the roles of our senior NCOs in shaping the culture of our organisation.
Yeah, sure. Hey, it's often said, and I fundamentally believe this, that culture trumps strategy or grand plans. So for all that a new CO or a commander might have a view on where he wants to take the organisation, if that person does not get the culture right, I don't think he will be able to achieve what he wants to achieve. And so our culture is fundamental. But I think there's a sort of sense that our culture is so fundamentally interwoven with our history that it can't move. And if you take Sandhurst, for example, and whilst it has evolved, it still feels very much an officer academy that I went through. The culture there still feels very similar, yet the world around it has moved on, I believe, quite profoundly. And so I don't think culture should be anchored by history and heritage. I think it should be supported by it. I think history and heritage provide fundamental foundations upon which you can build, but it should not act as a drag anchor. And I think we've got to evolve our culture. And for me, that's our culture about diversity and inclusion and the strength that diversity offers and the strength that being an inclusive organisation offers. And I'm not simply talking about inclusion in relation to BAME, LGBT and gender. I'm talking about being inclusive with all of those that we command to ensure that everybody has a voice, everybody has a say. I think there's something really important with regards to our culture, building on our values and standards and what that means in terms of unacceptable behaviour. to hear some of the things that go on, particularly with sexual misconduct, makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. And if we don't know what is right from wrong in terms of sexual misconduct, how can we judge right from wrong on the battlefield? And wow, are we asked to make some profound decisions on the battlefield with respect to taking life and protecting life. But I would say that, and I'm sure you felt this, one of the most important things for me in terms of the development of our culture as a field army is to drive this idea of innovation and constant adaptation. And it's fascinating chatting to General Mike Elvis, the GOC of the 3rd Division, just a couple of days ago. And indeed, we had this conversation on his arrival chat with me. The division, the 3rd Division that Mike Elvis is currently commanding, I think looks and feels in the equipment that it has and the way it operates in terms of combined arms maneuver, almost no different to the 3rd Division that landed on the beaches of Normandy in 1944, 76 years ago. Now that just can't be right when the world around us, and by the world around us, you know, a great example, something like the iPhone. Wow, the world around us has transformed so profoundly over the past 20, 30 years, and it's just accelerating. To think that the way we fight is relatively unchanged from 1944, 1945, I think shows a lack of insight and investment in terms of our thinking as an organization. It reflects something that is sort of anchored too heavily in the past, rather than being prepared to be bold and innovative. And that's why I took the decision to set up the CFA Innovation Fund, to push out that idea of innovation to every unit, why we've made adjustments to our training, to bracket everything in terms of validation into this idea of mission zero, and then post mission zero, then give the battle group and its commander the freedom to operate and fight to win, because ultimately that's what we're in the game of doing, fighting to win, not fighting to come second. And to fight to win, you have to outwit your adversary. And that may mean you have to deviate from your standard procedures. And we've got to have commanders at every level that have that ability to innovate. So what I've sought to do in terms of our culture is to start to create an army that is not content with the today, is always looking at how it can improve, how it can move on, to ensure that when we do cross the line of departure for a major operation, we go in there confident that we have the men, the women that can win, that can prevail, because ultimately those are the key defining factors. So I think culture is absolutely key to leadership and leading an organization. But as a leader, if you want to change that culture, you can't just do it by standing on a pedestal and shouting loudly. You've got to do it through various initiatives and garner a momentum behind you. And I think with regards to innovation and adaptation, I'm starting to feel that. This idea of empowerment and empowering our soldiers to ensure that they can make judgment calls on the battlefield as well as in barracks, I think is key. And I'm starting to feel that momentum, that energy, that shift. And if I can leave in a year's time and see leaders at every level, and it won't be all of them, but a critical mass of them that really have embraced the values and standards of the British Army in terms of what that means in diversity, inclusion, and unacceptable behaviour, and have started to really empower our people and really embrace this idea of innovation and fighting not to impress, but fighting to bloody well win, then I think I would probably leave a pretty happy Commander Field Army.
General, thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious we're right up against time, and you've got a busy schedule. Have you got time for one more question, or do you need to move on?
Yeah, go on. Let's do one more.
Great. I wonder if I could touch on a topic that I know that's going to be lively this afternoon, not least after Colonel Douglas's, and that's toxic leadership, or however you want to describe that, destructive or bad leadership. It's a perennial problem that pervades across organisation. It's certainly one that is often comes up in discussion. I was wondering if I can get your views on how the organisation is seeking to tackle poor leadership and again, what our senior NCOs can do, what role they can play in rooting it out for good.
Yeah. If you could just bear with me a moment, just to talk slightly more philosophically about good leadership, bad leadership, and great leadership. We tend to view things in life as being on a sort of a linear graph. You can start off poor, but do you know what? If you work hard, invest, educate, develop, work hard, develop, you can earn money, improve your status, improve your job, get a better house. If you're a sportsman, you put in those hours, you get to 10,000 hours, and you go from being poor to being good. You take up a musical instrument, you can start off poor, and things are sort of relatively linear. And there's a view, I think, that leadership is on a linear graph. That you might start off a bad leader, but you work to improve, and you can become a good leader. I think that's probably right. But I think you potentially then lose the graph when you go beyond good leader, because I don't think that graph is then linear in terms of great leadership. Because I think for me, the idea of good leadership has a sort of a moral underpinning to it. When you talk about a good leader, you know that they really care about their people. They care about the decisions they make. They care about the impact that they have. There is a sort of a moral and ethical underpinning to it that is quite powerful. For a great leader, I don't think there is that same moral and ethical underpinnings. You can see great leaders that have had hugely detrimental impacts locally, nationally, or even globally. But wow, are they great leaders? But they don't really care about the impact of what they're doing. They often care more about self-interest, their own hubris and ego. So I think part of the problem that we have, perhaps let me just take with some of our officers at the moment, and there are some senior officers. Some of them are great leaders. I mean, they are genuinely great. Intellectually, what they try and do, how they think about problems. But perhaps hubris, a lack of sort of ethical, underpinning, moral sort of strength. They don't think enough about the impact that has on those around them, the way they direct, the way they engage, the language that they use. So I think there's something interesting about toxic leadership, which is always often viewed as bad leadership. It absolutely is bad, but you can be a great leader who is toxic. You can also be a bad leader who is toxic. So I don't think it is necessarily one of looking at them and saying, these are bad leaders. Some of them are bloody great. And we've got to work out how we as an organization make them better and how we develop them. And for senior NCOs, for all of you out there, it's no different to what I said about the role you have in terms of nurturing those that you command. I would wager that, the sort of the rock that was Ivan Jones that sort of broke off of a cliff face at the top end of a river has had so many bumps along the way that chippy, arrogant shit that joined the army, I think is now probably more smoother and rounded as an individual because of the experiences I've had along the way. And those experiences have been with the officers, the soldiers, the junior NCOs, the senior NCOs that have guided me along the way. Mick Wallace, my first staff sergeant in 9th Squadron, helping guide me. Billy Craig, my recce sergeant, what he did to support me and just sort of help me in terms of the way that I thought. Sean Cunliffe, Gordy Greenwood, Gaz Buttery, who were my 3-section commanders in my first troop. They were really profound in setting me on my course. And so all of those people, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, have made me the person that I am today. Because when I walked out of Sandhurst to join the Royal Engineers, I didn't join as Ivan Jones, CFA Des. I joined as Ivan Jones, Troop Commander, Royal Engineers. And what made me CFA were those people that have influenced me along the way. And as I said, as a CO, I spent more time in the Warrant Officers and Sergeants' Mess than I did in any other place within the regiment. Why? Not only was I able to influence what was going on, but they were able to influence me. They understand what's happening at the coalface. They've got a wealth of experience, and they're wise and perceptive. So I think each and every one of you have a role in terms of helping develop those that have toxicity in them at the earliest possible stage, helping them understand what good looks like. And hey, if it isn't working, then I think we as the senior leadership have a role to play in doing something about that. And I would say, if I were being probably too honest, I think we have sometimes missed some difficult decisions that we should have taken along the way. And interestingly, it's a conversation I had with number one board, the senior appointments board, led by CGS, only a few weeks ago, about some of our toxic leadership amongst the officer corps, very small in number, but what we are seen to be doing about it. Because if we are seen to be complicit, if we're seen to be doing nothing, then I think we are setting the wrong example for you at your level. So I think we have a role to play. But absolutely, you have a role to play in supporting, developing, and nurturing those people. And then, dare I say it, you also have a role to play with some of those toxic leaders that ain't going to change, and protecting those that you lead as well.
General, thank you very much indeed. I'm really conscious the time is against us now, but I sincerely appreciate, as we all do, your time today, for giving us your honest and open and transparent insights. And I think it's really set the tone for today and for the discussions later on. So sincere thanks. Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. And any of you out there, when I'm visiting your unit, do take the opportunity to come across and have a natter. I still appreciate it. I still enjoy it. Do give me your insights and thoughts. And thank you for what you do in the field army. I'm always humbled when I travel around and see what we're doing on operations and back in barracks. It's hugely impressive, and you play a crucial role in that. So, heartfelt thank you from me as the commander to all of you, and best wishes for the future. And look after your families and stay safe in this difficult, challenging environment. Thanks very much. General, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado then, we're going to move on to our second speaker of today, an individual that absolutely needs no introduction to yourselves, the Army Sergeant Major, W1 Gav Patton. Sergeant Major, over to you.
Sir, thank you very much. Hey, listen, it's always really difficult to follow Commander Field Army, but I just want to pick up on one thing that he mentioned there, and he spoke about how he didn't join his CFA DES and how he's been inspired and developed by other people. And I just want to echo that, and I can name the RSM that inspired me to do what I've done. That's Jim Mockridge. He was my RSM. And someone who I always looked up to, and an officer that inspired me is now Colonel Jim Hadfield, who's a CO at 5 Rifles. Two very influential people in my career, and have very much made me do things the way that I do them today. Okay, so why me? Well, hey, listen. So the reason I'm here to speak to you is because I am a soldier, and I've been in your ranks too. And we talk about the using rank as an opportunity to do more for your people. And that's my first line to the Army. And I make absolutely zero apologies for saying that to everybody if they stand still long enough for me to say it, because I believe that consistent messaging is the key. And it's good now to hear that sort of thing is being said. So you know who I am, you know what I do for you. I'm here to serve you. I'm your voice up at the 4-star space. That's what I do. But I'm absolutely here to serve you, to use my rank as an opportunity to do more for you. I've been a corporal in depot. I've been a sergeant in depot. I've been a colour sergeant at Sandhurst and a sergeant major at Sandhurst. And I've been in operations in every single rank. So I've got a good idea as to what it looks like and what it feels like to be a leader in combat and in barracks, and also to be led in combat and in barracks too. I've not always got it right. I've made plenty of mistakes, and like Commander Field Army mentioned, I've been developed by my mistakes, and I've learned from them and moved forward. And I think part of my role is to ensure that I pass on my mistakes to you so that you can learn from them, so you don't make them yourselves. I'm not here to say how to command or lead your soldiers, because that's very personal. That's very tribal. But I will offer some ideas. I don't do strategy. That's what my boss does. I look after people because I'm a soldier and I'm headquarters. The last thing soldiers want is for me to act like an officer. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is Army leadership, what our junior commanders do, the importance of junior leadership, our jersey, and then we'll move on to the legacy and 10 diseases of leadership. Now, you see there that I'm mentioning junior leadership, because if you are a sergeant or above, then you have been a junior leader at some stage. And I want, you will now be doing things the way that you've been doing them for years, and you will want a corporal too. So I want you to understand what I believe is important about our corporals, and your part in developing them. But first off, we've got some hot news that's just come in. It's always difficult. I don't know if you're laughing or rolling your eyes. This one's my favorite. And that is the last one. Okay, so but back to the important stuff. So what is Army leadership? Well, hey, listen, so I'll start my understanding of Army leadership, the models we use and how it's taught, because I want us all to be on the same page. We'll then look into what our junior commanders do. Field Marshal Slim would say that leadership is that mixture of example, persuasion, and compulsion, which makes soldiers do what you want them to do. I would say that it's a projection of personality. It's the most personal thing in the world because it's just plain you. A doctrinal definition of leadership is a combination of character, knowledge, and action that inspires others to succeed. Now, what I would say as the Sergeant Major of your Army is that leadership is the ability to make others want to do what they don't want to do. And I just want you to listen to this following quote. It's something that I read years ago and it still stuck with me. So when the blast of war blows in our ears and the situation is bloody dangerous, you need instinctive, exemplary, innovative, and inspirational leadership. Such leadership requires individuals who are not easily intimidated, who display both character and confidence. Your character, your conscience, your principles, and your honesty are the basis of your ability as a leader. It's your individuality, your single-mindedness, your integrity, your humility, and your desire to be damn good at what you do that is important. Now, you see on the slide in front of you a picture of our leadership doctrine. It's a great handrail for all of us to follow, and I recommend you read it and keep it to hand. Leaders are readers, and I'm a firm believer of that. And I'm also a believer that our soldiers deserve outstanding leadership. They're entitled to it. It's everybody's responsibility to understand how they can best lead and what works for them is, and there's no one size that fits all solution. It's taken me personally many years and many mistakes and many different experiences to identify my own leadership. When I look back to my leadership journey, I shudder, and I want others to learn from my mistakes. As an army, we've now professionalised leadership, and I'm sat in the centre of army leadership today. We've stopped guessing, and we've written doctrine for it, yet we still don't read it. In an organisation where our soldiers, our people, are the most important resource, why do we spend so little time about reading lessons on the theory of leadership? Let me put it another way. If you're in the RAF, it's all about aircraft, how they work, how to maintain them, how to get the best out of them. If you're in the Royal Navy, it's about boats or ships, depending on which part of the Oggin you're on, how they work, how to maintain them, how to get the best out of them. And if you're in the room now, I'd ask you what's important about the army. Well, it's about people, how to get the best out of them, how to maintain them, and how to use them effectively. So, if you're in the room now, I'd ask all of you now to see a show of hands to see how many people have actually read our Army Leadership Doctrine, that publication that's on the screen right now. And I'm always really disappointed. And I'd offer, if you were about to go into surgery and you ask the surgeon, how current and up to date are you? Well, I'm using procedures from 30, 40 years ago because that's what I learned. I haven't bothered reading the latest stuff. Would you still be content to go under the knife? If you went to see a dentist for a tooth extraction and they were using procedures from 30 years ago because they don't think they need to read the latest doctrine and the latest rules and the latest ways to get things done, would you be comfortable getting your tooth taken out? Or would you want somebody using the very latest stuff? I'll leave you that thought. Remember that rank is an opportunity to do more for your people and not an opportunity for people to do more for you. That said, we're far from broken. We know what the components of fighting power are, the Army Leadership Model, and we know what the Army Leadership Code is. I believe the key to success with all of this, and you as senior NCOs, is ensuring that leadership at any level, we live and breathe our values and standards. We use the Army Leadership Code as a vehicle to deliver that. And we underpin all of it with discipline. These are the components of fighting power. If you're not aware of them, then please make sure you have a look. None of this I've made up. It all comes from the leadership doctrine. This is the Army leadership model, which again, hopefully you all know because you're all leaders. And these are our values. Sea drills shouldn't be anything that is new to anybody. And here are our standards. And like I say, your values and standards applied by use of the Army Leadership Code as a vehicle, underpinned by AGI, will fix a lot of our problems. So I want to talk very briefly about our junior commanders. Now, Ollie Grenda said that the military now talk about strategic corporal, meaning that in modern day warfare, a corporal on the ground can change the overall strategy of the entire campaign. Because whatever that corporal does can instantly appear on the news. From an act of heroism to a war crime, everything is out in the open. You manage these people as sergeants and senior NCOs. Now, I agree with him. We expect a lot from our junior commanders, arguably more than ever before. When I joined the Army 23 years ago, the pace was glacial compared to what we see today. Technology was basic, and the most I had to worry about as a young commander was bottles and batteries in my lamppost. Now, things are very different. I remember being a young Lance Corporal in Sierra Leone. I was terrible, really bad if I'm honest, and I was nearly sacked, but that's a different story. My job was to sustain water and food, used a map and compass to navigate, and my daily checks just consisted of weapons, ammo, and a radio check, which took me 10 minutes. Fast forward to being a platoon commander in Sangin on Herrick 11, and my checks were an event, a day-long event, where you sort in all sorts of different stuff. Multiple, hundreds of thousands of pounds, different bits of equipment, all signed for by a junior commander, all signed for by me, but then looked after by a junior commander. Simply unrecognisable to where we are today. So we definitely expect a lot more. But it's not just kit and equipment that our commanders look after and manage. They manage our soldiers too, which are our most precious resource. When the senior commanders leave, it's the junior NCOs that step in to provide and support the people provide the support that our people need. One moment they're engaging with the enemy, giving orders and making life-changing decisions. The next, they're dealing with someone who's just received some bad news at the bottom of a cot bed. And that's a massive range of responsibilities. But since we're talking about what junior commanders do, I'll let you peer through a window into my mind and attempt for you to understand how I see the Army. I see it in three big handfuls. The first part is our private soldiers and our junior NCOs. I believe that these are the people who deliver victory on the battlefield at point of contact. They do that. I don't do that. That's what they do. Our warrant officers and our senior NCOs. I believe that they are the bastions of standards, the guardians of traditions, and they are the people who advise our junior officers. And then we have our officers, and that's really simple because they command the Army and they command soldiers. But they must always put their soldiers first. Now, I've stated that our junior commanders deliver victory on the battlefield for our commanders. But it's our most junior commanders who we must trust to make the right decisions in a difficult situation. And this is not restricted to the battlefield, it's true for camp also. I think that our junior commanders are the first layer of the leadership onion, where the rubber meets the road, and the soldier that executes every order, even if it's given by CGS himself. The key part that you play as sergeants in this is that A, once you were corporals, but B, now you are managing these people and setting an example for them. The importance of junior leadership. Conflict has changed, will continue to change, and with the pace of battle now being much faster, we'll rely on junior leadership and the decisions made by the strategic corporal to deliver victory on the battlefield for our commanders. CGS said, delegate to the point of discomfort and then delegate once more. And this is exactly what we do with our junior commanders. We afford them mission command so they can make decisions to support and execute the commander's plan. In times of crisis, our junior commanders must feel supported. And that is a key role that you have as our senior NCOs, to afford them the room and the space to make mistakes and to be supported from the chain of command, you as senior NCOs. The level of delegation and weight of command is much greater now and plays well into my earlier quote regarding the strategic corporal. Yet the enduring commitment remains the same wherever you are in the world. Whether you're in the trenches of World War I, the beaches of World War II, the fobs of Afghanistan, or the complex environment of deep cyber, we will all need our junior NCOs to command and to deliver victory on the battlefield. Remember, we can delegate tasks, but we cannot delegate responsibility. In 1894, Rudyard Kipling said, "The strength of the pack is the wolf." And the strength of the wolf is the pack. I see our junior commanders as the wolves. They make things happen at the tactical level. They are the gearing between the senior commander and the soldier. It's a junior NCO's business to know their people, not just their names, but their circumstances and their family, to name a few. It's a difficult relationship and one that requires skill and intelligence to get right, and it will need mentoring by sergeants and senior NCOs. A firm grip and a light touch is the way I've tried to do my business. And to be fair, it's worked as long as there's mutual trust and respect. And that means doing the right thing at a difficult time when nobody's watching. Living with soldiers as a commander can cause friction and can be tough. But the junior NCO is the eyes and the ears, the command chain, and critical for soldiers' welfare. And the key part in all of that is if they are the eyes and the ears, then the people they come to are you as senior NCOs. So another dit now, this time it's about a corporal from a Herrick tour. You can picture the scene. We were an infantry company all tooled up, about to go into a heli-borne assault, and all of the comms kit starts to go down. As a company sergeant major, I'm stood there thinking, right, helicopters are coming in. We need to get ready to go. And this corporal comes to me and says, "This kit's some of the kit's not working. I can't let you go." I can't make that decision, but I'm the person who goes to the commander and says, "Hey, we can't do this." But it's a junior NCO that has fed me that information and had the moral courage to step forward and essentially ensure that our operation works properly. So we stopped, we got everything sorted, and then once it was sorted, we left. It wasn't his fault. He'd done all his pre-checks. It was just one of those things. But it's the impact that the NCO chain has on a brigade level operation. It's critical. Field Marshal Rommel said, "Be an example to your soldiers in your duty and in your private life. Never spare yourself, and let the troops see that you don't in your endurance of fatigue and provision. Always be tactful and well-mannered, and teach your subordinates the same. Avoid excessive sharpness or harshness of voice, which usually indicates that the soldier has shortcomings of their own to hide." I think it's an important statement, which can be applied in any and every situation. We've all come across someone like this, and although we may not remember exactly what they said, we always remember exactly how they made us feel. That is important. In times of crisis, when confusion reigns, it's NCOs that hold the team together. They are with the soldiers, they are the soldiers, and they lead the soldiers through crisis. Now, I remember being in an orchard with rounds coming in at 3 or 4 different firing points. Had a soldier who was shot in the shoulder. And while we were planning the next move, I could see one of my lance corporals running around, checking on his rifleman. And he saw me looking at him, and he shot me a wink and a smile, and he's like, "You all right, sir?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am. I'm good." And he was cutting around looking after his people. Everyone knew he was good, and they really respected him. But the key thing that stuck with me was that a young soldier was running around under fire, checking on his rifleman to make sure that they were good to go to the next phase. It was infectious. Now I could spin dits for days about stuff that NCOs have done, but I reckon you've probably got the idea. But again, the key thing is that you as senior NCOs are the people who mentor and lead these people. Now, I always talk about the legacy, and you'll have heard it's the third line that I say to the Army all the time. That's leave a legacy. Now, I normally show a video, but we're going to run out of time, so I won't be able to show that for now. But there are some key messages, and it's about the New Zealand All Blacks. The video, it's a 3-minute clip, and they talk about the importance of wearing a black jersey with a silver fern. And what I say to you is that the jersey you can see on the screen, you've worked incredibly hard for to wear as well, and we just need to remember that and be proud of that. And as senior NCOs, just think about how much you've done to wear those stripes on your chest or on your arm, and think about the people who may have worn that jersey before you, who are no longer here, and think about those people you want to set up for success afterwards. It's a really powerful thing, and we need to be really proud of what we do. You as the senior NCOs are the people who you are making things happen, and everyone looks to you when things need to get done. And the All Blacks also talk about, CFA spoke about culture, and the All Blacks talk about it too. And they say that they would rather have a 70% rugby player give them 100%. They've got no time for somebody who thinks they know it all. If someone's a superstar and they know it and they don't give 100% and they're not a good person, then they won't play. They don't want them. And I kind of agree with that too. And I was quoting Soldier Mag a couple of months ago saying, well, if you're not a good person, I don't want to serve with you. And I honestly believe that. Because again, CFA mentioned this as well. We make life-changing decisions on the battlefield. And if we can't make those decisions and trusted to make those decisions in camp, then how can we be trusted to make those decisions on the battlefield? I do not believe that you have a good field soldier and a bad camp soldier. If you're a bad soldier in camp, you're a bad soldier in the field. That's what I believe. But they talk about why the All Blacks are the greatest rugby team in the world. Well, it's not down to nutrition. It's not down to training, not down to genetics. It's down to their culture and the way that they're led. And their consistent drive to make things better. Their consistent drive to leave their jersey in a better place. The pride they have in their jersey and how they do their business is really, really powerful. And they talk about the hacker. The hacker's really powerful, and it's something that brings them all together. We're in the army. We also are a high-performing sports team, and you as senior NCOs, you set the conditions in your platoons to ensure that people understand they are part of that high-performing sports team. We've all got a responsibility to play here. Now, Brad Thorne, New Zealand All Black, said that champions do extra, and I believe that our commanders have a huge impact on our people. And like we mentioned earlier, every order is eventually carried out by a junior NCO with soldiers. And when we talk of leaving a legacy, I think it's important to remember that it's our junior NCOs who are the gatekeepers of culture and behaviour. And they have an impact on our people each and every day. I just want to read a quick statement here from a private soldier on Herrick 9, and this proves the importance of the culture set by the NCOs. There was a corporal in my platoon in Sangin that we all used to loathe, a real Jekyll and Hyde. In front of the officers, he was the perfect NCO, always authentic and keen to get the toughest jobs there were. In front of the private soldiers, he was a bully who would belittle you if you didn't do what he wanted you to do, and he'd threaten you if you didn't come up to scratch. Whenever we had a break, he would make us sit around and listen to his stories. We all used to laugh, and some even copied the way he dressed, just so that he would not single them out. We were scared of him because he was tough and because of his force of personality. Those who didn't really know him called him a leader. We knew him and we hated him. And I think that's really powerful. And that's why it's so important we have a challenge culture in our army. And again, you get stuff that's fed to the junior commanders into you as the senior NCOs. And we just need to make sure that we're receptive to all of that. We can generate this challenge culture where people are comfortable with being challenged and offering challenge. And we start to develop an environment where people start to learn from each other, a learning environment. And very quickly, we affect culture and climate, and we become a petri dish for experimentation, which is hugely important. But in this example, the corporal's clearly getting it wrong, because people hate him. And that's a strong statement. I want all of us to generate and foster a challenge culture where people can feel comfortable offering advice. And if you go to the 10 diseases of leadership, you'll see that one of them is equating the level of the advice with the rank of the person who's offered it. That's a disease of leadership. We'll come on to those in a wee second. So as junior commanders, and senior NCOs, it's really important that we leave a legacy. And Charles Darwin once wrote that it's not the strongest species that will survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. And the army's changing, combat's changing, and our people are changing. And COVID-19 has been a great example of that and how we've done our business. Just flick on to the 10 diseases of leadership. So we're coming to the end. So if you haven't seen these, then you need to look them up. And I challenge every single one of you to hold yourself to account to this every single day. I think it's page 82 or 83 in the back of the Army Leadership Doctrine. And there's a little paragraph for each one in there. And as commanders, going back to my surgeon and lawyer comparison, you are professionals in leadership. People look to you, and like CFA said, that when things go wrong, people become subordinate and they look to be led. If you are in rank of any kind, you are commanding people, you are leading people. And you need to use your rank as an opportunity to do more for your people. So have a look at these and see which ones you recognise the most. Me, for example, the quest for the 100% solution. I'm really bad at that. So But hold yourselves to account and look yourself in the mirror every day and think about these. It's really important. And guide your people and mentor your junior NCOs. Questions will come later on, but what you do have now is on the slide, you've got my Twitter and some ways that you can get hold of me. And you'll see a quote at the bottom from CGS, which I think is really important. You know, march to the sound of the guns, fight for intelligence, and never leave a soldier on the battlefield. And as senior NCOs, clearly part of our business is ensuring that we look after all of our people on the battlefield. Hey, listen, it's been a real privilege to speak to you today. Thank you very much. It doesn't end here, it starts here. So you've got my details, so please engage. And I'll be hanging around for questions later. It's great that we've got Sergeant Katz from Australia, and good day to Brian Buskell as well, who was one of my mates from America. And I know he sat in the mess drinking some beer over down under. So it's been great to speak to you. Thank you very much.
So, Major, thank you very much indeed for your talk today. I've heard you speak several times on the topic of junior leadership and in this instance, the role of the senior NCO in nurturing, coaching and bringing on the very best of our next generation of junior leaders. And what I love about the way you present and what you talk about is how you simplify what can often be seen as a complex issue and boiling it down to things like setting the example, looking after your people, and just being a good person. And you can't really go wrong. So thank you very much indeed. I won't attempt to unpack that now, but clearly you're joining us for the panel session later on this afternoon, or later on this morning, and we welcome your further thoughts on some of those issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break now. We're running a little bit behind time, but there's plenty of value added here, so no problem whatsoever. So we're going to come back at 10:07, so it gives us 5 minutes, recharge your glasses, and then please join us back here. And also, can I just also remind you about the question and answer facility here on Zoom. So please, once you've had your discussions, keep the questions coming in. Many thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's my absolute privilege now to introduce our third guest for today, Lieutenant Colonel John Douglas. Colonel John joined the Army in 1997 and has had an illustrious career to date, serving a number of years with airborne forces and a breadth of operational experience in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Why is he here today? When he was a student on the Advanced Command and Staff College, he wrote a paper on toxic leadership, which gained real traction and was subsequently published. And Colonel John has spoken on numerous occasions across defence and wider on the issue of toxic leadership. And in line with the question I posed to CFA this morning, it is a topical issue and a perennial issue that this organisation has to deal with at all levels. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lieutenant Colonel John Douglas. John, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are around the world. I've worked for a toxic leader. They were selfish, narcissistic. It was all about them. To my shame, I conformed. A valiant and courageous colleague stood up to this toxic leader, and the whole system turned upon them. Now, I'm conscious, talking to the Sergeant's Mess, that we have many stars in the audience, people that have succeeded and done great things, and hopefully live by our values and standards. The paper I did, that Langley's just talked about, was published both across across the fence, informed part of the Army Leadership Doctrine, which the Command Sergeant Major has referred to, and has been published wider. It was very much a self-journey for me to work out why I behaved the way I did, but also the response of the organisation, our culture, and our leadership approach. To start off with then, I believe the two defining characteristics of what I believe toxic leadership to be is very much that poisonous relationship that the leader has with their subordinates, be that deliberate or sometimes accidental. And also that the toxic leader's underlying motive is generally generated through self-interest and not that by their team or the individuals that they have the privilege to command. It's an antithesis to selfish leadership. It's selfish leadership. The thing you'll find, and hopefully I'll conclude with at the end, The danger with the term toxic leadership is it is a label, and labels are definitive. And I think from what we've already heard this morning, they are not as black and white, not as conclusive as perhaps we might wish to consider. To consider the background, though, the British military as a Department of State is uncomfortable about talking about poor and underperforming leadership because it's in something inherently intrinsic to our organisation. It's one of the principal things that we seek to be good and professionalise at. And so we are uncomfortable because any failure in leadership is seen as a failure not only of the organisation, but also potentially our cultures. However, every time there is a failing, an inquiry, or whatever else, quite often we look and criticise both our leadership and cultural flaws. There is a perception in the military and wider that selfish leadership is still a problem, and even recent studies and surveys conducted by the CAL and others continue to see that. And also, we don't necessarily always really understand the problems of negative leadership. Hopefully this presentation will help in that, nor do we measure the cost. Now, I say we don't measure the cost because it really has an impact on the moral components. The Command Sergeant Major talked about the components of command earlier on, and it erodes the trust agenda. And it erodes the trust agenda, not just with the individuals, but actually it can go wider than that in terms of the way a team performs, but also our relationship with other people, our families, and all the rest of it. So whilst we don't necessarily measure it, there is evidence out there that there is still a challenge, whether that be the number of people that don't report issues, but also that trust relationship, that trust agenda between our leadership and our senior leadership and ourselves and our messes, be that the officers' mess, sergeant's mess, or corporal's mess. One of the reasons I say that we're uncomfortable with it is that negative leadership is an oxymoron. Leadership is seen to be a good thing because we all hopefully believe in the selfless leadership model. And indeed, the one thing that I always remind myself when I come back to Sandhurst is that underlying motto of serve to lead, something that I certainly didn't really appreciate or understand as an officer cadet, but I do now. And it doesn't matter whether you serve in the dark blue, light blue, or in the army, or in the civil service, or wider across defence. Certainly all our leadership is always seen to be positive. We have the processes and procedures in place. I'm not excusing or defending people that have robust leadership styles, because there is a place and there is a need for that. And indeed, the whole, as our Army doctrine talks about, transformational and transactional leadership, and CFA himself talked about, that point of contact on the battlefield and the importance of being able to grip and deliver. But it's that element where people can use and exploit what is a privileged position, particularly when we look at rank. So I've defined up front what I believe toxic leadership to be. In one of the most insightful publications by a Colonel Denise Williams, she talked about a spectrum of leadership failure. And indeed, in our doctrine, we talk about a spectrum of leadership styles as well. And toxic leadership or bad leadership is a personal thing. Again, if you were in the room, I would ask individuals to see where they would draw the line personally, whether it be from the incompetent all the way through to the those that have real malevolent tendencies. And around this spectre of toxicity is a huge industry, both in industry and in the military, in terms of what do we do about bad leaders, and how can we make bad leaders good? Because one of the things that bad leaders normally do, or the good bad leader, again that sounds like an oxymoron, they achieve results. They achieve results. Now, in this wealth of literature, they tend to talk about the psychology of leadership and people's behavior. And certainly they see a spectrum of psychological conditions where people become more and more self-interested and exploitative. That leads us to one of the bits that our doctrine refers to in terms of, it talks about this dark triad and the various behaviors that people have in terms of narcissism, self-obsessed, people that lack empathy, such as the psychopath, but also the type of behavior that people will undertake, where means justify the ends. And indeed, every so often in the national papers and wider, there'll be various articles that talk about particularly psychopaths and narcissists as to why they are good leaders, because they achieve results, because they have great power thrust upon them, and they deliver. The one thing that they do lack, though, or tend to lack, is that emotional intelligence, that ability to really connect and serve and work with those under their command. So, noting the Command Sergeant Major's sort of emphasis on rank, I just wanted to sort of just pause just for a minute in terms of using your rank and your position to help those under your command and tutelage. And power itself is quite an interesting thing. There are many different forms of power and types of power, and certainly one of the things I would ask for you to do in terms of self-reflection is, in the military, as a hierarchical organisation, we often think principally of our rank, because with that position comes status. And of course there is that saying that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But actually, all of you as individuals, whether you be junior members of the mess or senior members of the mess, actually have wider power within yourselves and in your situation. Kirk himself talks very much about the social connections, particularly in the military, and that's quite important because actually that not only can aid a toxic commander to succeed, but actually the organisation will work with poor leadership in order to still meet the ends, to still succeed, to still win in battle. The other thing I would point to on this slide, and again it's come up earlier on today, is the power of personality. You read any leadership book, and the importance of personality, that connection with those under your command, is absolutely key and central. So why does negative leadership reside in the Army? It's great to have a colleague joining us from the Australian Army, because actually a few years ago, General Orme did a study into poor behaviour within the Australian military, and he found that the risks of poor leadership are much greater in the military than in civil organisations, because of our constructs, because of our deference to rank, because of the chain of command and the flow of information. And he was very insightful in the work that he wrote. And actually, whilst there are fewer studies in broader society, we mirror society. And in terms of percentages of people that have seen or worked for negative leaders, actually we mirror society. Quite often figures are as high as 80 or 90% in terms of seeing poor leadership. And even recent studies still show those sorts of statistics. Now, I'm not going to suggest that every leader is poor or manipulative. And what these studies don't necessarily do is highlight whether it's a few bad people that people are aware of or lots of bad people. I'd like to think it's the former. But again, it's always something as a learning organisation that we do reflect on. And because people and leadership is so central to everything we do, it's absolutely something that we continue to interrogate and continue to seek to achieve, to do better. So in the Army Leadership Doctrine, there is a piece in the back about the potential toxic triangle. This is my own personal toxic triangle from the study that I did. The one in the back of the doctrine handbook is slightly different. I'm not going to dwell and use time to talk through each individual circle, but to draw through a couple of particular reasons why negative leaders can succeed. Under the leader, absolutely, rank has its privilege. Military leaders are a product of their environment, and so they are seen and encouraged to do well, both from those in the various messes that support them, but also the hierarchy that works around them. And it's encouraging to hear CFA today talk about how he recognises that personally and what he's personally doing about that. But also, I think what we've heard today, and is still very much the case, whether we look at our historic examples, we do tend to err to strong and heroic and visionary leaders, because those are the leaders that will succeed on the battlefield. And we need to continue to have those people. And so there is that tension. As CSFA raised this morning, that ability to act and be decisive in times of crisis is absolutely critical. The environment. We are a performance-driven organisation. You just have to look at your S jar or your O jar, and it starts with performance, performance, performance. Leaders drive for success. Leaders drive to deliver results. And so that's something that we need to be aware of. Likewise, our short-term posting cycles allow us to tolerate people. And more importantly, and this is a really important message for those, those out there in your sergeant messes, is poor leaders are harder to identify from the top down. And so your support in educating, in nurturing, and correcting is absolutely key, because you get to see things at a level that those above the poor leaders don't necessarily always get to see. And then there's the followers. We have a really important part here as well, both as leaders and followers. The military's culture to deference of rank goes without question, and there's a reason for that. However, we also have a very strong anti-whistleblowing culture. We have a loyalty to our chain of command, and even though we might support a friend who is in difficulty, ultimately we have a loyalty to the wider organisation as well. Now, absolutely, as the Army Doctrine talks about, there are those that are conformers and those that are colluders. It's those that are colluders, that's the most poisonous, infectious thing that we must root out. Emulating and copying poor leadership styles because you get the rewards of rank, because you get the rewards of being seen to succeed, must be driven out in all of our messes. Some of you may be familiar with things like the Stanley Milligan experiments, where there's a natural obedience to authority, and then there's an element of social conformity as well. And Philip Zimbardo also talks about this group behaviour. What we can't ever allow is that those poor behaviour traits become acceptable in the works that we do. So what? If the military wishes to deal with toxic leadership, we've got to understand it, define it, and act. And certainly our doctrine, is tackling that, and forums like this also help. We've got to acknowledge that negative leadership erodes the values and standards that we see very much as our vital ground, and key to success on the battlefield, but also at home. But acknowledge that bad leaders get results. They absolutely get results. And any decision or indecision will have implications. The term toxic leadership is a label. Be very, very careful branding people with that. As good as well as bad leaders will continue to be branded as toxic by subordinates who question their leaders' actions and motives. That won't go away. Finally, help is out there. When I worked for a toxic leader, the ombudsman didn't exist. The challenge process didn't exist. There are forums out there now that are there to help you. As I say, the actual policies are all there in place as well. Get a buddy, distance yourself if there is somebody there. Use your peer network, and absolutely, as a sergeant's mess, please help in rooting that out. And if all else fails, report it as well. That's me. Thank you very much.
John, hey, thank you very much indeed. That's exactly what we were hoping for and expecting. As I said at the beginning and alluded to with CFA, toxic leadership is a perennial issue that gets discussed by all ranks, certainly when the CAL engages. As you alluded to, there's been a number of surveys over the last few years that highlight this. This is still an issue. But as both yourself and CFA alluded to, toxic leadership is not black and white. It's a complicated issue. And I think the first thing we need to tackle collectively is what do we actually mean by that term? And I think some of the language you're using there about failures of leadership, about negative, perhaps at worst case, destructive leadership, those are sort of terms that may help us unpack it, and understand it on a spectrum is really, really useful. Also acknowledging that the very nature of our organisation does create some barriers, as alluded to in the Australian report you mentioned there. And again, how do we counteract some of those barriers that are institutional? But what you've also done is very usefully highlighted what role we can all play as leaders at all levels, but particularly pertinent to the seniors who's here in the audience. And if nothing else, I think today is about drawing out that discussion. What do we mean by toxic leadership? What does it mean for you as individuals? How can you relate to it from your own experience? And I really like the honesty that you opened up with on your first few sentences there from your own personal experiences. And I'm sure we've all got similar experiences where, for good or ill, we perhaps didn't react the way we ought to have in light of seeing toxic leadership at some point throughout our career, and exists at all ranks. However you define it, there's poor leadership, failure of leadership, I believe, at all ranks. We can't be too hard on ourselves. I do believe as an organisation, consistently believe we have excellent leadership at all levels. And as an organisation, we are often seen as the gold standard across many other sectors. That said, it still pervades as a problem. We need to get after it. So thank you, John, for engaging us on this today. And I urge the audience to take this subject away for further debate and discussion. So, John, thank you very much indeed. Without further ado, though, now we're gonna head 12 hours ahead in time to the other side of the world, where we are joined by Sergeant Ben Katz. Sergeant Katz, a warm welcome from Brisbane, Australia. Sergeant Katz joined the Army, the Australian Army, 18 years ago. Spent much of his time, in fact, his whole career in the infantry, in the infamous 2 RAR, which has a worldwide reputation for excellence. He served 2 tours as an instructor at their School of Infantry and has a wealth of operational experience under his belt as well. Southeast Asia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Sinai. So plenty of experience to draw on. He also knows the wet weather of Brecon and the hills of Brecon very well, having done 2 Cambion patrols and commanded a team that won the gold medal there, all to his credit. But critically, he's been part of a team that have helped develop the Australian leadership Army, the Army leadership doctrine. So he comes here as an informed authority on the subject of leadership from an Australian Army perspective and a perspective from one of our closest allies. So we're really looking forward to what you have to say, Sergeant Katz. A warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
G'day, ladies and gents. I'm Sergeant Ben Katz from the Australian Army. As previously said, I am a career infantry soldier and I'm currently posted to our School of Infantry. I feel extremely privileged to be able to speak tonight, not just because it's a topic that I feel extremely strongly about, but also because I've served with the UK Armed Forces, obviously on Cambion Patrol as previously said, but also alongside you guys overseas. My topic today is going to be Senior NCO Leadership and Influence, an Australian Army perspective. And I'd like to start by looking at the fact that when you are confronted with poor culture or decision making as a Senior NCO, you can choose to accept it, or you can attempt to exert influence, not become a part of the problem, and seek the best result for your team. Okay. In order to get into it, I'd like to talk about the transition from junior NCO to senior NCO, and obviously where I come into that. I spent 3 years as a 2IC and then 4 years as a section commander. During my section commander time, I obviously did the Cambrian Patrol. I did as a 2IC as a section commander, and also stepped up, temporarily promoted to sergeant, and was the patrol commander. Now, I learned a ton about what it means to be a member of a command team, and a lot of that was obviously tested during competition. And the thing about competitions is people only ever hear about the results, especially if they're positive. And if there's one thing I'd certainly like to share tonight, it's obviously that it's certainly not like I did everything right on that leadership journey. I was lucky to have an extremely strong 2IC, Carl Fabreski, and he sort of steered me through. And from that, I learnt the value of what a 2IC and then later what a senior NCO in a command team brings. Now, I think one of the really difficult things about going from junior NCO to then becoming a senior NCO is the fact that by the time you become a senior NCO, you're probably about as good at junior NCO as you're ever going to be. And I was particularly cocky about that. I had an extremely good sergeant in the past who seemed to make everything look particularly effortless. And I thought that would be the same story for me, that I'd just move in there, crush it, and get everything done. And obviously the reality for me is I became a platoon sergeant in 2016, and I took over recon platoon, and I automatically made pretty much every single poor decision under the sun, produced some of the worst paperwork the Australian Army's ever seen, filled out forms incorrectly, didn't know certain forms existed, and made pretty much every error there is to make. Now, I was lucky during this transition that I had some excellent mentors and role models, other senior NCOs within the 2nd Battalion, who steered me through this process. And through them, I managed to get out from under the admin burden and start to develop how I saw myself as a senior NCO and how I thought I could exert influence. And a lot of that was in that initial stages. I built a network and support, and then I developed a firm idea of what it means to be a senior NCO. Value proposition. For me, the value proposition of a senior NCO is not the ability to make a bunch of ration packs appear. It is the ability to temper a commander's theoretical enthusiasm with hard-won practical experience and use this to influence officers and junior NCOs in order to develop a strong culture within your organisation, enabling it to accomplish any set mission in any given context. Ultimately, the job of a senior NCO is simply to make things happen and achieve the end state. Now, the reason I came at it from this perspective is I feel too often a senior NCO is pigeonholed into mainly an administrative logistical function, where senior NCOs impact decision-making at the tactical, operational, and strategic level, and we do this as part of a command team through influence. In order to develop influence, we first have to have credibility, and that is both up and down the chain of command. And these are some of the ways we develop credibility. I know everyone sees leading by example. It's a bit of a throwaway. It is a cliche, but the Army is a very practical activity, and we do need to get out there. And I'd like to reframe the leading by example as we provide a physical reference point for what a soldier and leader should do. And that means making sure that during physical training, we don't make the office chair our best friend. We get out there, get involved, and in order to lead, you have to be able to keep up with the front. You have to be able to move to the point of friction. You can't just lie around on the rifle range running practices. You need to actually do some shooting. You need to, rather than just talk tactics, you need to show your junior NCOs that you can still do what you constantly preach about. And that segues into my next point, which is standards as a holistic concept, not just dress and bearing. Now, I'm certainly not trying to say that dress and bearing do not have their place. They are part of instilling discipline, but they're something we don't need to be too emotional about. We can just simply deal with them, not over-exaggerate them, and then focus on what is most important, which is tactical and cultural standards. For tactical standards, obviously, we've got shoot, move, communicate. And again, that's having the physicality to move to the point of friction. That is understanding weapon systems, demonstrating how to use them, being able to practically demonstrate everything we teach. Obviously, culturally, we need to set the standards there and ensure we instill the correct behaviour, and I'll talk more about that in a later slide. An enormous part of developing credibility is ensuring our soldiers understand the purpose behind any task. And now this is not some byproduct of Generation Y. If you can explain to your soldiers why they're doing a task, it shows them you implicitly understand it, you can see value in it, and they have a reason to do it. And even if it's not the best task, they'll understand what you're trying to convey and get it done to the best of their ability. Now, being fair and equitable, it's a fairly simple statement, but again, nothing undermines a team worse and creates more resentment if you're seen to be not being fair and showing preferential treatment. And though it is an easy thing to say, in 2016, when I rejoined my platoon, it was the same platoon I'd left as a patrol commander. A lot of the blokes were still my friends. And for me, it took a little while to navigate and make sure that I was treating everyone fairly and not showing preference to guys I was mates with and had served with just a year or two prior. Advice and guidance. Now, this ties easily and straight into the 10 leadership failings that the Sergeant Major of the Army before stressed, and I think it's one of the most important points I'll talk about, and that is straight speak. Do not filter your advice. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be abrasive or rude, but we do need to be blunt. When we're informing our subordinates, we need to tell it straight, tell exactly what's happening, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. And then the same is true when we're telling it up the chain of command. Now, senior NCOs have been torturing our commanders for years, ensuring that they put a bit of common sense into their planning and holding them to task. And we need to ensure that even if it seems like they don't want our advice, we reiterate the point, reframe the point, and tell it till they get the message. And I'd like to close that one off by saying the Army needs senior NCOs to be leaders, not union reps or corporate yes men. That means we don't represent the nitpicking, whinging ideas up, and we also don't just say yes to every single task. We need to ensure we get the best outcome for our team. And we achieve that by being across the level and giving straight advice. Culture. Administrative training and logistical functions are key enabling actions that senior NCOs facilitate. But the defining impact of a senior NCO is our influence on unit culture. And the reason we have such an enormous impact is we've generally been part of the unit for the longest. And also, all the junior soldiers within that unit will be looking to us as the point of reference. They'll see how we act and they'll attempt to emulate it. We need to ensure we imbue Army values within the team. We need to lay a strong ethical and moral foundation. And again, that does sound easy, but once you start blurring the lines, your soldiers will follow. We need to ensure an operational and mission focus. Now, this one particularly, as you know, kinetic actions overseas wind down, some people do find it difficult to remain focused on operations, but we're still conducting all kinds of operations overseas, and so are UK Armed Forces, and we need to ensure that our organisation understands that at the end of the day, that is what we do as an Army. We go conduct operations overseas, and we need to train accordingly. And my last point, which I think is extremely important for this slide, is we need to create an organisation people want to belong to. The Army has a lot of good opportunities. It shouldn't be too hard for us to make a work environment that people want to come to. Everyone knows that within every platoon, there'll be a section that people want to be a member of. And almost always that section will have the strongest section commander and the strongest team to IC. And that goes along up through subunits in the company, in the battalion, and same again. And that is a culture that that command team creates. Okay, senior NCO role in modernisation. The reason I thought it was extremely important to add this slide is because I feel senior NCOs get a pretty bad rap when it comes to our role in modernisation. I feel we're often seen as fairly obstructionist, and I want to address that. So the Australian Army's future concept is accelerated warfare, and it emphasised the extremely rapid pace of change in the contemporary operating environment. It notes that the character of war is constantly changing, but the nature of war remains the same. And it also notes that experience guides our ability to meet the challenges of the next conflict, and that is where we as senior NCOs come in. We don't need to act as an impediment to modernisation, but generally we've seen several cycles, different technology on the battle space, what is good, what isn't. And we need to add practical experience to conceptual proposals and mitigate the advent of change for the sake of change. Change for the sake of change is inefficient and it is not innovative. And we need to make sure that our chain of command understands what is good and innovative and what has been tried before and just does not work. Okay, I think this is one of my most important slides, and it is success through failure. Training must allow for failure in order to ensure the team is truly tested. And the presentation before addressed this. We are in the Army. We're in a results-based organisation, and often pretty much every activity we do is designed to achieve the end state. And though I'm certainly not suggesting that we come up with training where the design is to fail, we need to ensure we have tough training that allows failure. And allowing failure facilitates, not impedes, mission command. If our subordinates feel that they can go out, try something innovative, take a risk, do something different, and it won't be poorly reflected in their PAR if they don't achieve the end state, it won't be the end of the world, it won't be the end of their career, then people will become more and more innovative in their leadership styles and they will develop much more quickly than if we don't allow failure. Hand in hand with that, we're always going to point out the mistakes of our subordinates. We need to own our own. We need to show that it's okay to fail. And this for me is obviously particularly important because, again, I know from my competition experience, people just talk about the result you achieved at the end, especially if it was the one they wanted. They don't talk about all the mistakes and failures that leaders make and that I made throughout every competition I did. And we need to never attempt to conceal weakness as it impacts on teams' capability. We need to ensure whatever our weaknesses are, we train for them and mitigate them. And then reflection and review is key to continuous development. So there's no point doing any kind of activity at any point if we're not going to look at it. And I feel in this bit, often when we do an AAR and after action review, we'll often be extremely critical and we'll rarely talk about the things that teams did well. We need to emphasize the positives, dissect the negatives, and then move on from that. And the next activity we do, we need to work on what we talked about from the last one. Because often we'll just look at that in a vacuum and then we just move on forward and we don't really take those lessons and develop as a team. And I'd also like to emphasize here that self-reflection as a leader is extremely important and it is the key to continuous development. As a senior NCO, we need to instill balance. We need to ensure we understand the difference between positive involvement and micromanagement. When we get out from behind the office, when we help our junior NCOs, when we demonstrate it, we need to ensure we're not taking over the team, trying to lead their section and relive the glory days, that we're allowing them to develop, not micromanaging, and be involved where we need to be involved and not where we don't. Office versus the field. Corporate governance is a massive thing, unfortunately. Anyone knows when you're creating any kind of good training activity, you have to do reams and reams of paperwork. And to ensure everything is covered and done correctly, you need to make sure you get as efficient as possible so that whenever your subunit goes into the field, when you're with them, you're on the ground, you're not back in the office doing some kind of task. You need to make sure it's all done and get out there and be seen, to be present. Leadership can't be done from behind an office chair. It needs to be done out in the field with our soldiers. Now, this next point feeds back into needs versus wants. We need to understand what our team needs to function, needs to achieve the end state, but also seeing them as human beings and what they need as human beings. And from there, we need to make sure we represent them correctly, but again, don't just feed into that whinging behaviour and don't facilitate that. That leads me into my final major point, which is team over self. We need to put all our career aspirations aside, look at our soldiers, know what benefits them, and represent them accordingly. At the end of the day, and in conclusion, We need to remember, as senior NCOs, we are not corporate managers or just a link in the logistical chain. We are leaders, facilitating a command team through plain advice and practical experience, and always providing a physical point of reference for what it means to be both a soldier and a leader. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Sergeant Katz, you may not have nailed it as a new platoon sergeant, but you nailed it today. So thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Your honesty and your insight were really, really welcome. Then I like the way you approached it from the very off in terms of influence. You know, our doctrine classifies leadership as the character, knowledge, and action that inspires others to succeed. And if leadership isn't about inspiring, it isn't about influencing, I don't know what it is. So you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I like some of the themes you picked up that absolutely resonated with some of our other speakers today as well. The role of the leader, particularly our senior NCOs, in setting the climate that shapes the culture. The role of our leaders at all levels, of how we support change, how we sort of lean on the strengths of our past, but we're not afraid to change as society and indeed the operating environment demands that we must. I like what you brought up there about success through failure. We are mission focused. We like to thrive on success, but it's a constant source of debate here about how much we allow for failure. And to my mind, it's the leader that sets that environment that allows people to fail in order to get better. One, perhaps the audience might want to reflect on, have we got that balance right? And what's our role in that as leaders? And you'll talk about balance, and again, drawing back to our own doctrine. You know, at the core of our doctrine sits the Army leadership model, task team, individual, and the leader's role is balancing those three elements there, achieving the task and mission, and building your teams, but ultimately looking after and developing individuals within that team, including yourself. And that balance is a key role that we have to play as leaders. And the last point, self-reflection. And I'm going to leave it on that one as I turn it to the audience and ask you to cut away in your breakout rooms now to do some of that self-reflection. If you're on your own, that's you're in your own time to do that. Clearly, if you're in the circa 200 mess groupings that are joining us today, then please do use the time over the next half an hour or so to reflect on everything that's been discussed today, so that we can come back for a really rich question and answer session with the panel later on. So we're going to come back at 11:25. As I say, keep the questions coming in as you discuss them over the next half an hour. That'll feed them into Professor Lloyd Clark, who can pick them up at 25 past 11. But my final thanks once again to Sergeant Ben Katz for joining us from Australia, and we'll see you all at 11:25. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Lloyd Clark. I'm going to be running the question and answer panel for the next 3/4 of an hour. I've got some questions that have come in, so thank you very much for those, and I'll be doing my best to get through as many as possible. A question to kick off with, and it's something that CFA has spoken about this morning. Indeed, all three of our other speakers have also touched upon, and it's learning from others. And I wonder, with the panel's disparate experience over the years, whether you feel that you personally have learned efficiently and effectively from others, and perhaps can our armies do some different things to support that learning. Perhaps if I ask Colonel Bagles first.
No, thank you very much. I've been privileged to work with some amazing soldiers, senior warrant officers, and very senior officers as well. And it's absolutely, you learn from good. But I think it was Norman Schwarzkopf that told us that you actually learn more from bad leadership, referring to my presentation earlier on. And so it's taking that balance. I think CFA mentioned today that he didn't join the army as CFA Des, and certainly in whatever roles, responsibilities, or tasks that we take on, it's about learning and developing as an individual from those around you, below, your peer group as well, very important, and above as well. So no, certainly I'm a big fan of constant learning not just through books, but through doing. So yeah, it's an important part of, I think, what makes me who I am today.
So I think the soldier experience of learning is slightly different. So I do things the way I do them because I've been brought up in a regimental system. So initially the light infantry, now the rifles. So I'm a proud rifleman because I'm in the rifles. But if I was arguably in a different regiment, I'd be proud to be in that regiment and do things maybe in a slightly different way. I think it's critical. You know, you almost culminate at maybe platoon sergeant, from my experience as a soldier, with learning. So you're always looking up until maybe you hit platoon sergeant, and then you have to start looking down as well, because then you're taking stuff from the newer generation and incorporating that in the stuff that you do. So I think it's really important to learn both up initially, but down as you start to go later in your career. I spend 99% of my time now looking at the junior parts of the army to learn, to ensure that our senior commanders understand exactly what's going on at the tactical level. So learning down, I think, is a critical one.
Thanks. Sergeant Katz in Australia.
Yep, I want to agree with the Sergeant Major. I feel we learn so much from our subordinates whenever I deliver a course. You know, not just instructing on that course, but learning from all the students who attend those courses. I always get so much information, and I definitely feel throughout my career I've learned from those around me. I feel forums like this, and obviously enabled by technology and given by the advent of COVID-19, have been a good forum, but definitely working in a team and seeing how other people function and what they do is definitely how I've developed as a leader. And I continue to do so, both from my subordinates and superiors.
Great, thank you all very much for that. And I absolutely agree. I think that this sort of an occasion when we can all learn from each other, and particularly interesting having a different sort of outlook from friends in Australia, really does help us all to develop, and perhaps we'll get on to some of those perhaps cultural differences a little bit later on in the question session. We're getting quite a few questions coming through about performance and being a performance-driven organisation. One of the questions that we've had is whether the organisation should base all promotion specifically on performance. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. Maybe I can start with the Army Sergeant Major.
Great question. Hey, listen. So I think it's a balance of both. I think the MS game of having to wait until you're in zone and getting certain grades at certain times has been frustrating. And you know, there are lots of people who think that you have to mark time and do a certain amount of time before you can be a certain rank. I counter that and just, you know, make sure everyone knows that I was a sergeant major of our army at 39. I don't know whether that makes me a good army sergeant major or a bad army sergeant major, but CGS clearly thought that I was the right person for the job. Would he have had a better product at 44, 45 if I'd have waited? I don't know. I don't think so. So I'm really keen to make sure that talent is recognised, identified, and we manage that talent correctly, because that's exactly what happens outside the wire. So the latest thing that we've seen that Programme Castle has pushed out, you know, performance-related promotion, 2A- exceptionals, regardless of time in rank, and you'll be put to the board, and then the board will decide where you go and what you do. I think that can only be a good thing. Clearly, you have to balance it. So you wouldn't want someone to be the company sergeant major of a battalion in 5 years, but I think our system's robust enough to make sure that wouldn't happen. So I'm a big believer of promoting people early if they've got the skills. We need to trust the officers who run the army to identify the skills and the talent and to manage that properly. So I'm a big fan of what Castle's doing. It's all good news.
No, thank you. I'm conscious of the saying "ability tempered by years of experience," which is you often hear, you know, from your careers advisors and the like. So absolutely, there's a thing about maximising talent and empowering our people, you know, and allowing them to grow at the speed that, you know, meets their skills and ability. Looking at going back to the nub of the question in terms of performance driving everything, I think there is a check and balance, because it's performance first, but checked by potential. Clearly, we are an outputs focused organisation, and some of the things that we deliver are quite esoteric. And what do I mean by esoteric? They're quite vague. So showing success, showing that you've performed, showing that you've met your commander's intent, can sometimes in certain roles be quite difficult to give an algorithm or a defined deliverable. And so those that make noises, those that are seen to deliver, do sometimes, and there's a whole load of study behind this, out-select in terms of promotion, both in the military but also in the civil sector as well. So there is a balance that needs to be had. Clearly, we want to pull talent through as soon and as suitable as possible. And I know, as Command Sergeant Major mentioned, I know that's something that Project Castle is looking out for right now.
I definitely think we really need to cultivate our talent, and especially our talented junior NCOs, because if we don't, we'll lose them to outside. A lot of guys, particularly junior NCOs, when they're looking at that next step, if they don't see opportunity and see that they'll be rewarded for results they get, then they're going to leave. And that's something we really need to address. We need to make sure that if there are guys who are really shining, we shouldn't just base it around a time thing. We need to look for an opportunity for them so they can continue to be a leader within the organisation, and also so they feel fulfilled and want to stay on and aspire to higher.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move swiftly on to a subject that has occupied quite a few of the questions that have been asked this morning. It's about toxic leadership. So, John, if I can just start with you. I'm just wondering whether the phrase toxic leadership is always a helpful one. Is it just a sort of a basket that we throw, all sorts of different types of leadership styles? Or would you actually say that it is a useful one that doesn't limit thinking? We shouldn't worry too much about that, and we can get on to perhaps more specific questions.
If I refer back to the presentation, toxic leadership is a label, and unfortunately, when you buy something off the shelf in a supermarket, it says jar of marmalade. You know what you're getting, or hopefully you know what you're getting inside. And I think hopefully from the presentation, but also from the discussions that you've had in your various messages, you'll realise that actually there's a subtlety to there. Where do you draw that line of toxicity or not? It's not helped that it's in common parlance now. You only have to look at the press, the media, and other forums, that it's something that has got into the everyday language, not just of our militaries, but actually of our society. In terms of something being toxic, something being bad, something being negative. Yes, I think our doctrine is helping. It clearly defines it as that poisonous thing, not just poor or underperforming. But I think we're going to continue to have that debate, for the foreseeable future. And some people will be branded as toxic, even though others may think they're not.
Great, thanks, John. We'll come back to you with this specific question, but maybe now I could go to the Army Sergeant Major. And this is a good question, so I will read it verbatim. The questioner has said, toxic leadership affects junior soldiers the most. In most cases, they are aware of the situation, and most of the time they're afraid to voice it out. How should they be encouraged?
So I think toxic leadership, I think it's a good label initially because everyone knows what they're getting, and the simple fact that people are talking about it identifies that it's a problem, and it raises people's awareness of other people who are toxic, but also of themselves and their self-awareness to ensure that they're not toxic or slip into those behaviours. I think I consistently bump my gums about ensuring that our soldiers are in a climate where they can challenge. And they need to be in an environment where they're safe to fail, but that's not a fail safe. They're two very different things. But we need to have a climate where people can challenge. There are lots of different ways currently in the Army to raise challenge, to complain about stuff. But what I would like to see is that the chain of command would be that place where our soldiers could go and complain. a rifleman, private soldier, anywhere in our army, I would love to be able to go and see their junior NCO to raise concern, or their senior NCO to raise concern. And so my challenge to all of you out there who are watching, who are junior NCOs or senior NCOs, you know which part of the army I think you fulfill, what the roles that you do. And I would challenge you to ensure that you are generating an environment and fostering an environment where your soldiers would be happy to come and talk to you about anything at any time. In order to do that, I think there's an element where I've got a part to play in this as well, where I show you exactly what it is I think I need you to do. But immediately, right now, set those conditions, set the environment, and ensure that you're open and honest with your soldiers 24/7, and that they can come to you with any problem at any time. That's what good leadership is all about.
Yeah, thanks. If we could, Australia, Sergeant Cass, have you got a view to offer on that, please?
I think just talking about the problem of toxic leadership is a positive. It allows everyone else to look at it. It allows people to evaluate their own leadership styles. And it is definitely something that can push a lot of people away. And I think especially within our teams, when people are junior ranks, they get extremely affected by poor leadership, and they're still at that stage where they'll make an emotional decision and leave the organisation quickly. Whereas once we've been part of the organisation for a while, we have a bit more tolerance. And though that's a good thing, it's also a bad thing, because it means we might not be as quick to jump on and address that toxic leadership.
In terms of our junior soldiers and not wanting to complain, this year's continuous attitude survey showed that 90% of personnel felt uncomfortable with making formal or challenging authority. So it really is an issue. But we absolutely have a responsibility as leaders at every single level to have that, to set that climate that you are approachable, that people can come to you. There are formal measures as well. There's the ombudsman, there's climate assessments, there's other opportunities, be they visits of personnel or whatever else. But actually, it's a really, really big step for somebody to make that challenge and to do it in a manner that they're comfortable with, that doesn't create a knee-jerk reaction or whatever else. So I think it really is, as the Command Sergeant Major said, it's about setting those climates, having those people that are approachable in the chain of command. Yes, that reporting goes through that chain of command, but doing it appropriately at every level. I think that would help certainly tackle what is a very difficult thing to deal with.
It's really easy for me to say as the Sergeant Major of the Army, but I think the Army has two types of people. I think we have whingers and we have complainers. And if we're whinging about stuff in isolation, then all we're doing is generating a negative narrative. And if we're wearing rank of any type, then we're failing to serve our soldiers and to use our rank to do more for our people. I think we have people who complain, and I'm not talking it has to be service complaints or whatever it is, although that is a system we can use. You can complain up the chain of command to the next rank up. Because what that does is it shines a light into the problem. The problem then becomes addressed and resolved, and therefore that is serving your soldiers and using your rank as an opportunity to do more for your people. And I think what's really important is that if any soldier from any chain of command has approached you, like they do to me, it's humbling that somebody has come to you with a problem because they think that you can help them. And what you need to do is be able to listen to them and give them confidence. That you understood them, that you're interested, and then you can go away and look at that problem for them. And the critical part of all of this is showing action. Soldiers don't mind bad news as long as they know why it's bad and how long it lasts. If you take a problem from somebody, a complaint, do something about it. Be humble they've come to you, and use your rank as an opportunity to do more for your people.
Great, thank you very much for those answers. I mean, it's quite clear from what you've all said that toxicity and leadership doesn't live in a vacuum. It feeds off and creates a climate and a culture. I'm just wondering what in this modern age of digitization, how technology can be used, can be exploited to improve the leadership culture of an organisation? And maybe even, we can get down to unit level. How is there best practice? Are there things from your careers that you think the listeners and viewers of this particular session might be able to gain benefit from? Sergeant Katz, can we start with you? Any thoughts on that, please?
Absolutely. I think a lot of units, particularly in the Australian Army, they use social media for positive messaging. It's a way to get ads about the Army out. I watched a particularly good one. I think it was the Royal Irish Regiment or something. It's a new ad they put out, which made me want to be a soldier again. So I think it's definitely a way we can promulgate the right message out. I definitely think on the flip side, social media can be an extremely toxic outlet where people air all their worst views about the Army and then other people see it and they feed on that. So I think it can be both a very positive thing that we can use well to put forward how we want the organisation to be viewed, but I also think it can be a negative outlet that is used extremely poorly.
So just picking up on what Sergeant Katz said there in Australia, it's good to know they've got the same problems on the other side of the world. So social media is a double-edged weapon, absolutely. My Twitter account, for example, my direct message function is open, and lots of people challenge me and say, well, you shouldn't have that open because you get all sorts of stuff. But what I can't be is just a picture on a board. I need to be there for our soldiers to serve them. But it's like having my office door wide open 24/7. And I get stuff all the time from people, which is humbling, and I get after all of it. And it's private, of course, and it's not plastered all over social media, which is good. But with regards to technology aiding leadership, so I am traveling a lot less now, but I'm absolutely more connected. So I did my annual RSMs convention with 300 RSMs, the Army Sergeant Majors from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the United States of America, and we're all connected, having conversations about some of our problems and the stuff that we share. More questions fell out of that than were answered, and I've now got, for example, a deep dive into D&I culture behaviours with all of the Command and Corps Sergeant Majors on the 1st of October, and I'll invite some of my international guests back into that as well. So we're talking about issues collectively, globally, because not one person has all the answers. So it's definitely more connected. And then that will go down to the RSMs once we've got the wave tops to get their feedback, which will be fed from the grassroots back up with their soldiers that they get to these meetings with. So all of this is fantastic. Bear in mind, I'm 41, and all of this is being generated by part of my team. So a young sergeant put all of this together for me and has taught me how all this is done. And it would be remiss for me to turn around and say, what do you know? You're just a sergeant. When actually I'm like with open arms, hey D, listen, help me out. How do we make this work? And he runs all of that. So a platoon sergeant is facilitating all of the discussion throughout every senior soldier in the Army for me. And I'm absolutely in his hands. So digitization is aiding my leadership. We just need to ensure that we understand that the tenets remain the same, the values and standards remain the same, and we're respectful just because we're not looking at somebody in the eye. I do miss the non-verbal cues, but it's given me so much more access to our people, and more importantly, it's given so much more access for our people straight to me. So I think it's a real positive.
Interestingly, that's something that we were talking in our own session here at the CAL. And to reiterate, the Command Sergeant Major said, we all feel less travelled, but actually more connected, not just in our work lives, but in our daily lives as well. And likewise, I'd also echo that the tenets of good leadership, the moral fabric that lays behind that hasn't changed, whether you were doing that face-to-face, virtually at distance, over the air, or whatever. And interestingly, it's the generational relationship with technology as well. Also, as a 40-something, our ability to take on new tasks and deliver using new technologies is something which comes as slightly more of a challenge maybe to some of us than others. I will just say, as a Raw Signals officer, clearly there's a security and a risk factor there as well. but actually, our ability to get positive messages out, to communicate are really, really important. But as you say, it doesn't replace those leadership principles, and when required, that personal touch as well.
Great. I mean, certainly in the COW, we have had to sort of become very aware of digitization and the use of technology over the last few months, and I'm sure it's the same for most people listening and watching now. And we call very regularly on a reservist for his particular knowledge. Shout out to Mick Latter, who helps us through helped us through these problems. And it was really on the reservist side of life that I just want to focus a bit now. And specifically a question to the Army Sergeant Major, and maybe I'll ask the other panelists for their comments as well. Do you feel that reservists face different leadership challenges to those serving in the regulars?
Yeah, I do. So, up front, we're all one team, regular reserve, we're all one team with our civil servants as well. So, but we can't get away from the fact that some people are with their command chain 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And some of our reservist teammates are only able to commit maybe one weekend a month or even less, if their personal circumstances dictate that. So there are definitely different leadership struggles forced by geography, technology, time commitments, etc. You only have to look at things such as competency with regards to more technical platforms, how you gain that in the first place, and then how you remain current and competent to deliver effect safely. And it becomes a really complicated problem. I think, so I was a reservist myself before I joined the regular army, and we have come on leaps and bounds. The way that our reserves do their business now, the way that they're so well connected to the remainder of their team in the regular army, it's astonishing to see. I spent yesterday evening with D Reserves talking about leadership and some of the challenges with his team, because he looks after the reserves for CGS, and it's fascinating. There's times now where I'll see reserve soldiers and not know that they're part of the reserve team anymore. Whereas back in the day when I was a reservist, we had different kit and equipment, and we're called all sorts of stuff. Whereas now it's completely different. So undoubtedly different leadership challenges, but like I say, the tenets remain the same. These challenges are forced through time and geography more than culture and climate.
No, again, through my service, I've been privileged to work alongside and with reservists, at every rank that I've served so far. Absolutely the importance of partnering and working as closely as possible with reserve and regular really does help. Yes, there are different leadership challenges, because you've got to balance your professional home life as well as your professional military life as well. And certainly that balance is unique, and something that I think as a regular I can't always empathise as much as maybe I should. But being grateful for the support that they continue to give us. And it's important to really work increasingly so with the reserve now. We talk about contemporary and future operating environments, and the breadth and depth and unique skills that our reserve colleagues give us are things that we will increasingly look to use in the future, not just in the augmenting role, but actually in the supporting and enforcing role as well. So that's...
Yeah, absolutely. Very recently, our reservists have had an enormous role in domestic operations, both the bushfires and now with COVID assist, and they're doing a large part of the infrastructure for supporting hotels, borders, etc. And I think one of the big leadership challenges they have at the moment is a lot of them are working in mixed teams, both of regular and reservists, and they're spending a lot more time with their leadership, which obviously causes some friction. There's also the problem when they're not spending a lot of time because reservists, they need to want to come to work. And if they've got toxic leadership culture, well, they just simply won't rock up for their reserve days. And as we've shown from our recent operations, we need the manpower, we need the ability they bring, and we need to make sure that their teams are supported, and obviously from the ARA that we provide that support as well.
Whilst we're on the subject of leadership challenges, got a few questions about future generations of soldiers and army leaders, and whether the panel feels that that next generation, and maybe those that are coming on behind, will expect different styles and skills from their leaders, and maybe exhibit different styles and skills themselves. What does the panel think about the next generation that are coming on behind in their leadership?
To me first, crikey. Quite often when a grandee in society makes a comment, it can often hit the media in terms of inappropriate use of language or whatever else, when people often refer to millennials or snowflakes or others. What I've seen from our junior soldiers and officers is actually the same hunger, the same desire to serve and lead that hopefully I had when I was in their position all those years ago. So actually, in terms of leadership challenge and leadership climate, the thing that I didn't have was the social media, the 24/7 social media bubble around me when I was a junior officer, and the pressures that brings. The almost constant scrutiny now that isn't just coming from your soldiers, but is also recorded in various forms and medias and all the rest of it. So actually, in some ways, the scrutiny that our leaders are under now is greater than I think certainly that I experienced when I was making my junior officer steps. Also, I think CFA referred to this earlier on as well in terms of our place within society. Society has changed significantly and is continuing to change significantly. And it's right that we, represent, those views, opinions, and moral positions that society has as well. What we don't want to do is dislocate ourselves from that. So yes, we do have to consider that. But ultimately, that leadership, good, bad, and indifferent, it's that balance from, and again in our doctrine we talk about the transformational, and there's more desire for transformational leadership now. That engagement, that conversation, versus the transactional, you will, because you have to. And it's getting that balance right. And I think, certainly I'm encouraged by what I see, of those coming through now. I'm not sure I would fare quite as well as many, given the additional pressures they're under.
So people know what they like and they like what they know. But if you don't like change, then I'd offer that you'll like irrelevance even less. I think in the last 23 years of my service, I've seen a huge change in the way that our leaders behave and conduct themselves and how they lead, me as a soldier. And maybe a little bit of that is as I've climbed up through the career path, I get to see more of what our leaders are doing. Never before have our leaders been so visible. Never before have they been so highly scrutinized. And that includes people like me as well. And social media brings that additional dimension of you now get scrutinized as a young Lance Corporal as well. So we are adjusting the way we're doing things. And I think it's a good thing. I think I see lots of stuff that people will send me, for example, and I'm like, well, you shouldn't have done that. So I absolutely get why your people are frustrated with what you're doing to them. And that forces people to change. And if, my second line to the whole of the British Army is that our soldiers don't make mistakes on purpose. But there is a fine line between making a mistake and reckless behavior. And if you're reckless, then you deserve to be punished. If you make a mistake, then you will grow and you'll learn from that. And you need to be in an environment where it's safe to fail, to learn and then move on. So I think our leadership has changed. It was very transactional when I joined the army. Do this now. And I always vowed that when I got to a position where I'd be able to maybe, hopefully try and affect change, that I would. And I'm very transformational in the way that I do my business, because I think that's how you get the very best out of everybody. And just because I'm the sergeant major of the army doesn't mean I'm the best soldier in the army and I've got all the answers. But what it does mean is that I can use my rank as an opportunity to do more for our people, to listen to what they've got to say and then learn from them and then develop the way that I lead. And that's the way our generals are doing their business now. So I think we're in a much better place now.
I think the constant access to information, but particularly in our junior soldiers, drives the need for change. And I think it's one of those things, like we talked about, it really means we need to make sure we give a purpose to everything we're doing. People won't just accept a crisp order, you must do it now. People want to understand the context behind it. And because of all these information technologies, they have a lot of context. So they're extremely inquisitive and they want to know exactly what's going on and get after it.
All right, thank you. I mean, certainly, speaking of someone that's worked with the British Army since the early 1990s, I absolutely appreciate that change has taken place. The Army is constantly evolving. And one of the things that I'd really point out as having been a very great advantage to the British Army is the way in which we have placed greater emphasis on the development of junior NCOs and senior NCOs. And we've got a question about that. It's not that there hasn't been development, but do we need more development? Are we doing enough to develop our junior NCOs and senior NCOs? And that's a question, obviously, that we can ask Sergeant Katz in Australia. Perhaps you'd like to start off with the experience in the Australian Army.
Excuse me, sorry, sir, I missed part of the question.
Yeah, it's just thinking about the way in which Army is changing and developing, the greater emphasis the British Army has put on the development of junior NCOs and senior NCOs. Is that something that you've seen in Australia? And are there thoughts about future developments that might be of benefit to your Army?
Absolutely. I think we're doing a lot of analysis at the moment on the training we do with our Army. And I mean, I'm a product of that. When I did my warrant officer course, I did the entire course of our subject 1 fully online. And I think we're looking at using technology so that people don't have to spend as much time away and they've got access to information. I think obviously a lot of the stuff we do is still a practical skill. So just online is not going to be the answer, but we are definitely seeing a lot of technology. We call it training transformation. We've brought a lot of the stuff that we used to do in just PowerPoints and things and have made them an interactive process. And we're really emphasizing that in our training, which means people need to spend less time away, but they get access to the same quality of information and same quality of training. And I think that's been really good. And there's definitely been, because of COVID-19, there's been a big emphasis on education, and that is holistic education, both officers, senior NCOs and junior NCOs, and particularly giving our junior NCOs some background and extra skills while we've got the opportunity.
Soldiers are not blunt instruments. And so to answer the question about are we doing enough for education for junior NCOs, no, is what I'd say. But I am absolutely getting after this and making sure that people understand this. If you look at how much education an officer has, for example, compared to a soldier, it's the difference is just unbelievable. I think there are 2 different elements to training. I think you've got your tactical training, which we're very, very good at. I'm probably the best in the world at, although Sergeant Katz may have something to say about that, but he's missed his turn now, it's my turn. But then you also have the in-barracks, the leadership, coaching, mentoring piece as well, which we haven't really, we're only in the foothills of developing. So for 23 years, I've been taught to lead in the field and to say, follow me, and to, charge people with swords and stuff like that. Whereas now it's, I need people to be able to lead through their softer skills too. And I'm talking a lot to the ALDP team who have changed the way that we do CLM and are much better educating our soldiers now without a shadow of a doubt. For example, I finish my time as, so I finished Senior Brecon, Platoon Science Battle Course. I then go and do a little bit of CLM, Command Leadership Management, and that was it then until I was an RSM. I had no formal education on how to lead and look after people in camp. and that just can't be right. So I'm getting after it. I'm speaking to everybody, as long as they'll stand still long enough to listen to me, about how we need to further develop our soldiers' education. ALDP is absolutely a step in the right direction, and but we do need a culture shift. So, for example, some of the new stuff, like they're doing in Australia, will involve people being and working online, and it was labelled stuff like pre-reading. No, it's not pre-reading. It's week 1 of the course, and that's the cultural change that we need to have. Just education is as important as anything else we do, because if we're going to hold our people to account and charge them with leadership and command of other people, then we need to give them all the tools and enable them to give them the best fighting chance to do that. So I think we've professionalized leadership, as I said in my presentation up front, and now all the rest of stuff is starting to fall in behind it. It's not something you can guess. It's a profession, and we need to spend longer training our people how to do it both in the field and out the field. ALDP is absolutely getting after it, and it will continue to develop.
I can only answer this question from a personal perspective. As a lifelong learner, I've always encouraged, whenever I've been in command, to mentor, train, and that does include leadership training for my soldiers, for my junior NCOs, senior NCOs, and fellow officers. So that's something that I've done every single time, to make sure we've covered every rank and every person. It does make some people uncomfortable, and it's about pitching it right and making sure that you need to continue to develop your people.
Great, thank you. And once we've got Sergeant Katz on the line here, I'd just like to for you to reflect upon that sort of cultural piece that we mentioned before. You said that you've served with the British Army. I just wondered whether you've got any thoughts about what perhaps the most stark differences are between our armies in terms of approach to leadership and leadership styles. Maybe you think that there aren't that many differences, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Definitely, from my experience, been involved in this, I don't think there are stark differences. I think there are a lot of similar qualities. I was definitely impressed, especially with the leadership failings piece, the frankness with which leadership has been discussed. And I think we have a lot of same values and we look for the same things. Obviously, Australians have a very egalitarian nature, so just having a bit of rank is not enough. You actually need to have all those leadership qualities. But I mean, what I've seen here and what I've seen work with is very much reflected. UK Armed Forces expect their leadership to have leadership qualities. And, I really feel that there are much more similarities than differences in the way we go about leadership.
Great, thanks. And perhaps to our other two panelists, in your experience, do we think enough about the cultural differences that may lay between us and our allies when it comes to leading and leadership? What are your thoughts on that, Colonel?
An interesting question. In fact, the last leadership book I read was by an American general, and actually there are nuances, but actually over and above, actually the similarity in the kinship and the similarities. Of course, that's me reading sort of another Western another Western country. I wrote one quote down, which I'll share with you, with regards to culture. Organisational culture is a dynamic phenomenon that determines human behaviour, thinking, and influences us in a variety of ways. Intrinsically linked to leadership, it informs our values and standards, as well as the unconscious beliefs that we follow. One set, culture itself determines who will and will not be a leader. And so whilst there are nuances and differences, across our allies and other armed forces around the world, it's certainly something, and it's that phenomenon that makes us and hopefully binds us and allows us to achieve greater things than the sum of the parts.
From a soldier's perspective, I'll be completely blunt and honest with you. Until I was the Sergeant Major of the Field Army, I couldn't care less what other countries were doing, because all I worried about was my riflemen and the people within my own battalion. I didn't know which brigade I was in. I didn't even know which division I was in. All I cared about was my soldiers. And I'm trying to change that. So that's why I will continuously, invite the sergeant majors of different armies, soldiers of different armies, to come into the stuff that I do with our soldiers, because I believe that not one nation has all the answers. I have picked up so much from RSMA, the Australian Army Sergeant Major, just through a monthly conversation with him and the other Five Eyes Army Sergeant Majors. And I now understand the importance of sharing, and of course you need to have a personal relationship with these people in order to get them to open up, and therefore you've got to be aware of their culture, their differences, and how they do their business. I learned very quickly that the British sense of humour doesn't always land that well in certain parts of the world, but that's a different story. But I think what I'm trying to say, it's really important. I'm trying to expose soldiers now from the very junior levels of our army to their equivalents, and all the way through to the sergeant majors of different countries' armies, so that they can learn from different countries, and different countries can learn from us too. When I travel internationally, I normally take a soldier from the army with us, so I can show other people how good our soldiers are, but also so our soldiers can learn from other countries too, and then feed that back in. So it's really important. But because our education didn't allow it for soldiers initially, we don't network. That's why I behaved in the way that I did. That's now changing.
I've got time for one last question. I can't ignore the several questions that have asked about 360-degree reporting, and I'll try and synthesize those questions into really one simple question. What advantages do you think it offers, and also what disadvantages? There must be some. Can I start with you?
Clearly, I've looked at 360 reporting as one of the ways that we can address negative leadership, and there are pros and cons. There are absolutely pros and cons. There is a fear that it detracts from the battle-hardened, and you engender a more politicized type of leadership, more consensus leadership, and that's out there in a lot of the literature and all the rest of it. We actually do use 360 reporting on a number of courses within the British Army at the moment, and certainly we continue to look at the experiences that our American colleagues have and the success that they've had in rolling out their 360 reporting program. But if we do it, then we've got to get the balance right so it doesn't become bureaucratic or burdensome. I think it was Wicker, the original author of Toxic Leadership, talked about the knowing and the unknowing toxic leader. Absolutely, we want to root out those people that know that their behaviour is negative and it has that corrosive effect. But actually, she also talked about that there are people that don't always realise that their behaviour is negative, and so actually it gives that opportunity to shine a light and present it in a way that they can recognise and respond to it. Then perhaps it's a good thing.
So I think it's a good thing. It allows a mirror to be held up in front of you, so you can really see the impact that you're having on other people, as opposed to just continuing to do things in blissful ignorance, thinking that you've got everything right all the time. So I'm a firm believer of it. But that being said, nobody should be in a position of leadership to be popular. It's not a popularity contest. It's about doing the best for your people. And sometimes the decisions that I make, for example, aren't overly popular, but I can see things in a different way because of some of the information feeds maybe that I've got that other people don't have. So it's not a popularity contest, but it's really important to understand how your leadership is being viewed and received, because then nobody's infallible. I make mistakes all the time. And sometimes it's, people saying, hey, that didn't go down too well. I'm like, okay, I won't do that again then. And if I don't have that feed, then I'll never continue to develop and evolve and keep getting better. And our people are changing. And I don't want people to do things the way that I want them to be done. I want people to do things the best way that can be done. And a lot of the time that comes from the most junior parts of the army fed into me. So I think it's critical to understand how leaders are impacting their individuals. So 360 is a good thing. I
absolutely think it's an excellent thing. allows more honesty. And if we're applying everything we talk about with leadership, we've got nothing to hide. It doesn't mean necessarily that all our subordinates are going to like us and say great things about us, but if we're doing everything for the benefit of the team, for the right reason, then at least the reporting will be respectful, and it should show you have the right qualities. Whether or not everybody likes you, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's excellent. It does hold up that mirror, and it holds people accountable. And it shouldn't just be those below us that are accountable for their actions, but everybody above us as well. We should all, as leaders, embrace a hard look at ourselves, and our subordinates can provide that for us.
Great, thank you very much. That's a really positive way to end. We're going to have to draw stumps now. We've run out of time. Thank you all for your questions. I hope that we did justice to some of them, although there were many that we couldn't get through, but they were very interesting, and certainly as a CAL team, we'll be taking those away and looking at them. If we can, we'll try and get some responses back for you. So thank you very much for being there for us today, and a special thanks to our panel, to the Army Sergeant Major, to Lieutenant Colonel John Douglas, and perhaps most importantly to Sergeant Katz, who it must be very late there in Australia. So thank you ever so much for being there and joining this session.
Thank you very much, Lloyd, for chairing the panel today, and I just want to echo some thanks there. First of all, to the CAL team who made today possible. A hell of a lot of work going on in the background. But as Lloyd rightly singled out, our panel today and our guests, Command of the Field Army, to kick us off today, to get that senior leadership perspective is absolutely critical and set the tone, as I said earlier. But to our panel, the Army Sergeant Major, who's a great ambassador of the CAL and has really supported us in our messaging. So Army Sergeant Major, thank you for your continued work at the top of the shop there as a senior soldier. To Colonel John Douglas, for your insights into a key concern, key issue that pervades our organisation, and it clearly sparks quite a bit of debate there, as we expected it to do. And of course, to Sergeant Katz, if the Australian Army have got NCOs like you across the organisation, and I fear for your enemies, you gave a superb account of yourself today, but indeed for your organisation as well. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm not going to do it justice by summing up the essence of today, but I was warmed by the consistent messaging from all our guests today, regardless of where they sat in the organisation or indeed in which army. And there's clearly a number of challenges that pervade us, and that we all need to get after wherever we are in that organisation, whether it be unacceptable behaviours, failures of inclusivity, or destructive poor leadership in the present, or indeed the future challenges, societal changes, the challenges of the future operating environment, digitalisation, the pace of change, accelerated warfare, and many more. And whilst those contexts will inevitably change, that is the very nature of leadership and how we lead. And as our doctrine often reminds us, the context change, but the fundamentals endure. And even as you sit there now as a senior NCO, how you lead will be very much context dependent. Whether you're a sergeant in 4 Para, 11 Signals Regiment, 5 Med Regiment, you name it, regular reserve, your context will always be different. But the fundamentals absolutely endure. Many of those were brought out today. Mutual trust, respect, communication, compassion, mission command, which is a command philosophy, but a mindset which has as its core effective leadership. Our role to shape climates, to shape the culture in which we operate, leading by example, being exemplars of our values and standards. And as the Army Sergeant Major boiled it right down to, it's about being a good person. So plenty to get after there. And I think what today has enabled us to do is, as I challenged at the beginning, for you to listen, learn, dissect, discuss, and reflect. And I go back to the beginning, what I said in my opening gambit. You as senior NCOs sit at the heart of our organisation, and it's of no surprise that as a commanding officer, CFA spent much of his time in the Sergeants and Warrant Officers Mess, because you are absolutely key to influencing our junior commanders, and the Army Sergeant Major gave a good account of why they are so important. But indeed our young officers and everyone else across the chain of command. And certainly having been an OC and a commanding officer, I can honestly say that I was probably influenced, as Sergeant Katz was right to point out, I was influenced more by people junior to me than I was senior to me. And the Sergeant's mess absolutely sits at the core of that influence. You've got a key role to play. But I'll leave you with the thought that I open up with. Leadership is an action. To lead is a verb. So what action are you going to take away from our thoughts, discussion, and your own personal reflections today? What are you going to do differently tomorrow that makes you a better leader and enables you to use your rank as an opportunity to do more for your people, for our people? And that's the challenge. So please take that challenge seriously, and we will all be better as an organisation and as individuals for that. I thank you very much for your time today, for your example, and of course for your leadership. And I wish you every success. Thank you. And so concludes another event here at the Centre for Army Leadership. I hope you enjoyed it. It certainly was for us another powerful example of how important leadership is to our organisation, and indeed to any organisation. If you like what you saw and you want more, please do visit us at our website, Centre for Army Leadership, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or join us on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.